In the cold void beyond the fringes of the Imperium's murky segmentum obscurus, where the thinning beams of the astronomicon wavered like a drowning man's last gasp beneath the weight of endless night, there lingered a star system, unrecorded even upon the most forbidden charts of the Imperial Navis Nobilite. 6 dead worlds hung suspended by the gravity of a ragged, ashen star whose light had dimmed millennia before, their surfaces once thronging with the teeming masses of humanity, now reduced to silence, so profound it echoed through the void. This nameless corner of damnation existed only in fragments of memory excised from Imperial archives, redacted from astropathic testimonies, its existence whispered between deckhands aboard voidfaring vessels, as cautionary tales and spectral rumors drifting through recalcitrant breath in shadowed holds. Long before Vulcan's birth, before even his great-grandfather had drawn air in the Emperor's decaying domain, the World Eaters had come, and in the wake of their fury they had left only the grinning bonescape of obliteration. Amadia's Vulcan, rogue traitor by writ and relic hunter by mercenary compulsion, tasted the familiar metallic tang of trepidation as his shuttle parted the planet's writhing atmospheric shroud. Decades spent threading the needle between sanctioned commerce and nihilistic heresy had woven silver frost through his dark hair and etched lines deeper than void cracks into a face, already reshaped by lost mechanical eye, gifted as compensation, when Alari marauders had peeled his own from its socket, now glowed with faint copper luminescence in the pit-black hollows of his cockpit. The reflection that glared back from polished console panels was the face of a man who'd strayed too close to the abyss too many times, the blood of ancient systems beneath his nails, as often as the stardust of forgotten Xeno's borders. His warrant of Tradia parchment of lineage and privilege, bestowed upon his ancestor as payment for delivering whispered secrets to an inquisitor's ear served as both shield and siren call, urging him ever further from the stagnant light of Terra's throne. The Fortunate Endeavor's augmented hull now orbited unseen far above, shielded by encryption and the corpuscle static of long-dead orbital defense systems. Below, the planet beckoned, its skin obscured by layers of violet-hued clouds curdled like gangrenous flesh stretching toward his descent. Scanners found nothing, no pulse of power cores, no flicker of thermal existence betraying cultist encampments huddled in shadow. An empty husk of vacuum-wrapped stillness, yet here, buried beneath mantles of dust, lay Vulcan's prize records of the 12th Legion's heresy before their fall from grace. Chronicles sealed in time capsule vaults collapsed beneath rubble-strewn wastelands. Breaking through the cloud cover, the rogue traitor's breath caught slightly within his rebreather's membrane bellow, spread a vista from some fever-mad dream of an ancient ecclesiarch's apocalypse. Endless forests of argent-trunked trees clawed upward from ashen soil, their leaves not green but deep, arterial crimson that rippled like fresh-spilled blood beneath the weak stellar gleam. Carved between these unnatural groves lay the skeletal remains of a civilization, martyred on the altar of Astartes' savage-riditanic spires of scorched adamantium bent double, like supplicants before an angry god, crumbled cenotaphs gashed open by chain-fist teeth, vast plazas where statues of imperial heroes lay dismembered with disconcerting precision. The air that engulfed his shuttle upon landing tasted of rust-flaked iron and spoiled nectar, a cloying slaughterhouse perfume mingling with the faint sweetness of the foliage trembling around his landing site. Boots struck dirt scabbed with powdered ceramite, perhaps, the detritus of World Eater legionaries, scattered across the rock by eons of tempests, their war plate pulverized into glass-fine particulates by time's indifferent fists. Vulcan's void suit, its deep ultramarine faded to dusk's bruised purple from acidulars and forge world ash, rasped against leathers layered with adamantium weave as he unhooked the nullfield generator from his craft's hull before securing the vessel. The quiet stretched, unnatural to hollow even for a grave world. From the shuttle's rear compartment came the whisper of steel on leather as he extracted his implement's luminator, Vox recorder, Auspex humming with latent charging. Lastly, the aged bolt pistol whose grip had been worn smooth by the sweat of 3 generations of his kin. The Emperor protects, its inscription once proclaimed across the barrel length, letters now reduced to phantom impressions beneath his thumb, as though only faith itself held their resonance against oblivion. The trek through sanguine woods lasted an hour that crept like drops of stagnant water from a rusted pipe. Coppery leaves brushed his face with damp fingers as roots conspired to grasp his ankles, while whispers slithered along the wind's unnatural Corinthaford syllables that thrummed like tectonic agony through the augmetic nestled in his left temple. Twice he spun, pistol drawn toward phantoms whose laughter dissolved into raven calls, or the snapping of brittle twigs beneath unseen carrion feeders born of irradiated genesis. Somewhere in the primordial depths of primal cortex, Vulcan felt the greasy residue of data coasts, like cognition spore left by enhanced Astartes' metabolic dread centuries past. The ruin devouring the horizon matched no surviving imperial construct. Descended from the folly of apostate architects, the collapsed edifice boasted archways wide enough for a dreadnought's tread, walls groined by adamantium plating that might yet smile in the face of orbital bombardment. Still, it had fallen flattened by some incomprehensible force descending like divine fury from above, a single corner left upright like the broken incisor of some extinct colossus. There, amid skeletal girders and infestations of lurid fungus feeding on ferrous decay, Vulcan found the doorway a sepulchre mouth choked with stone slabs fleshworm beneath his gloves. Gravel cascaded as he wrestled debris aside, the syncopated anthem of his exertion swallowed by the cryptic silence. Prying inward, the rogue traitor inhaled the sacrament of desiccation, stagnant air rushing outward, laden with centuries of inertia, fungal spores, and something richer, darker, preserved blood. His illuminator beam sliced through the tomber, carving a path into a devastation chamber that etched cathedral grandeur into abomination. Vaulted ceilings hung suspended like shattered glass above desecrated frescoes depicting Terra's Ascension gold-leaf saints expunged by chain X furrows, the Emperor's sculpted face obliterated down to the fresco plaster's marrow. Layer upon layer of grime clung to walls bearing the slashes of frenzied rage, not methodical ruin, as would suit the Iron Warriors or Death Guard, but the kinetic frenzy of berserker zeal. Across one gouge-ravaged expanse, letters carved deep into ferrocrete echoed the war cry of world eaters drunk on butchery's creed. Blood for the blood god. Vulcan's Auspex picked out vibrations from beneath the warped floor, platting hollow reverberations, promising chambers beneath chambers. Leveraging fused durasteel aside, he exposed what remained of a security hatch ripped bent-backed by grip strength that could sunder tank plating bare-handed. Below yawned a stairwell's curving throat, slithering into primordial darkness thick enough to strangle his luminators, reach an abyss from which even rad counter readouts fled. Retrieving a high-tension cable from his pack, he anchored it to a half-melted column before descending into the gut of the dead world as silence congealed around him like clotting plasma. 20 meters into the lightless maw, the staircase disintegrated beneath his boots-rusted bolts, surrendering centuries of duty in a rain of metallic scree. With practiced calm, Vulcan transitioned to cable rappelling, boots skidding across rotted alloy while particles of decayed history cascaded into the nothing below. His descent ended abruptly, boots crunching onto a floor still layered with powdery residue untouched for millennia, doorway arches framing a chamber resisting entropy's despoiling kiss. The hidden sanctum emerged from shadow as though breached through a temporal cataract and archivum, preserved within vacuum rigor mortis. Shelves groaned under the weight of data slates sealed in anti-corrosion gel casings, leather-bound folios locked behind crystal-flex laminate more ancient than Vulcan's lineage. Dust hung untouched in air unnaturally preserved by ventilation systems older than entire hive cities, their breath of faint susurrus hiding in the recycler vents. At the vault's terminus beyond liquid-cooled cogitator bank stood a scribe's desk of duralium and majesty, its surface home to a tarnished brass lamp resembling a cephalopod strangling its own spine, and an inkwell choked with parched, black scabs. Between them, cloaked in dust snakes, lay a tome bulkier than all but a star-described codices, its cover midnight violet beneath sediment tides. Crossing to the desk as though approaching an altar of certain doom, Vulcan traced the iconography embedded amidst Grimeth's symbol of his holy inquisition, stamped in long-pitted gold upon the leather binding. Or perhaps not leather entirely. His gloves brushed fibrous textures, flexing with unnatural resilience before his Auspex resolved the truth in chthonic horror. Attachpoint scars, Genomark residues still whispering of stolen legions, Astartes transhuman siege genetics book covers fashioned from butcher apothecary harvests, a world eater's flayed epidermis, enshrined as parchment foliage for the Inquisition's darkest seizures, Techeracy, blasphemy's zenith, the kind of relic that could obliterate dynasties if it were to ever whisper into ecclesiarchal ears. Vulcan's augmentation whined within his skull, as static surged through its connectorshi's hands, reflexively closing around the book's edges despite every bastion of self-preservation screaming for exodus. The page edges crinkled like dry tissue beneath his trembling fingers as he peeled back the first leaf, the tattered breath of long-trapped air escaping toward his autohood grill, carrying the scent of forgotten battles and betrayal's burning bile. High Gothic script sprawled across rag paper yellowed with preservation field attrition words, cascading in sapphire ink beneath his illuminator's trembling glare. Here lies entombed the chronicle of the 12th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, forged as war hounds and rabid as world eaters genisons of Angron, whose nails sang for blood even as the Emperor consecrated his crusade's dying breath. Know, reader, that your eyes trespass paths leading only to doom. Somewhere far overhead, something that should not have stirred Dita vibration, trembling through the deck plates that had nothing to do with gravitational tectonics. His luminator spasmed wildly before steadying as shadows stretched like grasping talons across the archivum walls. A sourceless rumble like thunder, sequestered beneath bedrock, juddered through Vulcan's tendons, while his atmospheric monitors assured stillness to the nanometric. The cable leading upward swayed faint, perhaps victim to the cavern's faint convection spirals. Perhaps something else inviting him toward the surface and escape. Vulcan smiled thinly behind his rebreather, eyes trailing back to the tome's entrance hymns. He had not journeyed this far, danced upon the nails of heretical worlds, endured the indignities of corsair kings whose empires were mere way stations to oblivion, only to flee before the ghosts of elder horrors. Let the archivum breathe its sacrilegious historislit rumble come what may. Dust cascaded as he settled into the rotating chair behind the dead Inquisitor's desk, fingers turning the page like an adept commencing holy meditations. Words swam up from Oblivion's reservoir begotten during the dying hours of the Unification Wars when Terra's bleeding fields were still steaming beneath distant thunderheads. Here lay the testament of warriors wrought not from noble ambition to safeguard humanity's fragile reach, but forged from embers of the Great Crusade's most implacable wrath, hunger given ceramite and fang, fury fed by genetic alchemy utterly unbound. Pure, plasmic warriors whose bite sundered hive shields as naturally as their brother legions might parse battlefield equations. The Emperor had looked down upon their first frenzied sortie against the Cephalic hive's adamantine bastions, decades before they came bearing their conquerors Gladius to this very world, and instead of Centuriso, the text claimed with venomous wonder the Master of Man had gifted them not merely a name reflecting their hound-hearted fealty, but absolution for their violence. Blood spilled in tides became faith transmuted into oracle bone. Vulcan read on as the chamber exhaled frost along his voidsuit seams, as the gloom beyond his vortex of light seemed to thicken and leer inward, as some part of him knew his existence had irrevocably cleaved into the before and the after. Yet such terminal truth paled before the book's knifing revelations, for in its entrails lay answers to debates whispered by rogue traitors, since the heresy had swallowed the Starsweet, the world eater's hunger for slaughter eclipsed even the other traitor legions. Why perfection in butchery could exist within sanctioned structures, only to rebel against the very empire that had crafted them into murder artisans. And as the words bled into understanding, the rogue traitor did not notice the condensation frosting across the book's flayed binding, turning briefly, impossibly, to crimson moisture like yesteryear's sacrificial offering. But if he had, he might have wondered, in the scrap-s of rationality still coiled within his soul, why the chamber's temperature no longer matched his suit's logarithms, why his soles fused slightly to the ferrocrete floor, why the blackness behind crepitating shelves now seemed to throb with Paleolithic pulse. The tome unfolded its secrets like a surgeon's blade unveiling tumorous filigree, and Amadia's Vulcan, intrepid pilgrim and promised damnation, beheld the birth of madness within the Emperor's shadow. The truth, as ever, devoured him gladly. They fight like the war hounds the Yesesh chieftains used in the northern campaigns, the Emperor reportedly remarked to his commanders, savage but loyal to the end. The name took hold quickly. The war hounds they became, and a red hound upon a field of blue and white became their heraldry, a symbol of their ferocity and their devotion to the Emperor's cause. The Legion took pride in this title, seeing in it nobility of purpose. Like hunting hounds, they would pursue the enemies of mankind relentlessly, without hesitation or mercy. Unlike some of their brother legions, the warhounds were recruited from no particular region of terror. Their Gantok came from various tribes and city-states, though some whispered that the Emperor had specifically selected them for aggression and competitive spirit for their creation. Whether by design or happenstance, the 12th Legion developed a culture that prized direct confrontation and personal prowess. The warhounds' approach to warfare reflected their temperament. While they mastered all aspects of combat as all Astartes must, they showed particular aptitude for close-quarters battle. Their training emphasized endurance and resilience, the ability to weather punishment and continue fighting long past when others might falter. They developed a reputation for succeeding in missions others deemed suicidal, pushing through enemy lines with sheer determination and will. Yet the 12th was never a blunt instrument, despite what their critics claimed. Their aggression was tempered by tactical acumen and a profound sense of brotherhood. In the Warhounds' earliest days, their training rituals emphasized partnership and cooperation. Battle brothers would be chained together in pairs during combat exercises, forcing them to coordinate their movements and protect one another. These practices fostered unbreakable bonds between warriors and encouraged tactical thinking even in the heat of battle. It was this combination, controlled aggression paired with brotherhood, that made the Warhounds such an effective fighting force during the closing years of Unification and the early Great Crusade. They became known as the Emperor's executioners, deployed to break deadlocks and deliver final decisive blows against particularly stubborn foes. As the Great Crusade began in earnest, and the Emperor's forces pushed outward from the Sol system, the Warhounds were held in reserve for much of this early period. Some speculated that the Emperor considered them too valuable to risk in the uncertainties of those first extrasolar campaigns. Others whispered more darkly that the Emperor kept them close as a deterrent against any who might consider betrayal among his newly compliant territories. Whatever the truth, when the Warhounds were finally unleashed beyond Sol, they were divided into multiple expeditionary fleets. The largest contingent, numbering approximately 8,000 Space Marines, was designated the 13th Expeditionary Fleet, soon nicknamed the Bloody 13th, by both their allies and enemies. The Warhounds served with distinction alongside several other legions, including the Space Wolves, Iron Warriors, and Dark Angels. These campaigns further cemented their reputation for bloody efficiency. Where they walked, compliance soon followed, though often at terrible cost. The Warhounds cared little for the preservation of infrastructure or the minimization of civilian casualties if such concerns impeded their primary objective. They came, they conquered, and they moved on to the next target without hesitation. Leading the Warhounds during this period was Legion Master Ibrahim Greer, a veteran warrior who had commanded the 12th for nearly 3 decades. Greer was respected not only for his tactical acumen, but for his ability to harness the Legion's inherent aggression without allowing it to spill over into undisciplined slaughter. Under his leadership, the Warhounds maintained a strict code of martial honor that emphasized controlled violence rather than wanton destruction. Jur instituted the tradition of gladiatorial combat among his warriors. Ritual duels fought in purpose-built arenas aboard their vessels. These bouts served multiple purposes. They honed combat skills, provided an outlet for the legionaries' aggressive tendencies, settled disputes between battle brothers, and identified those with the greatest potential for leadership roles. Unlike the death matches that would later characterize the Legion, these early duels were typically fought to first blood or submission. This was not to say that the Warhounds were without darkness. Their methods often troubled their fellow legions and Imperial Army commanders. There were troubling incidents. Entire regiments of army auxiliaries put to the sword for perceived failures, compliance actions that left nothing but ashes in their wake, and an increasing tendency toward isolation from their brother legions. Officers within the 12th enforced discipline through methods that others would see as brutalistic. Infractions that might merit verbal correction in other legions could result in severe corporal punishment among the Warhounds. More serious offenses were often settled in the fighting pits where the transgressor would face opponents without armor or mercy. Some outsiders viewed these practices as barbaric, but to the Warhounds, they were necessary measures to maintain the fine balance between controlled aggression and berserker rage. Despite these darker aspects, the Warhounds remained firmly loyal to the Emperor's vision. They took pride in being his weapons, instruments of Imperial will against a hostile galaxy. Their battle cry for the Emperor and Ibrahim Jur echoed across countless battlefields as they brought world after world into compliance. The Warhounds established their primary training grounds on the volcanic world of Ba, a harsh environment that suited their temperament. Here, new recruits were tested against both the planet's unforgiving landscape and their more experienced battle brothers. Those who survived emerged as true Warhounds, ready to take their place in the Legion's ranks. As the Great Crusade progressed, the Warhounds continued to earn renown across the galaxy. Yet for all their victories, something crucial was missing. Their primarch, the being whose genetic template had formed the foundation of their creation. Like all legions whose primarchs remained undiscovered, the Warhounds wondered about their gene father, creating myths and legends about what manner of warrior he must be. Little did they know that when they finally found him, their reunion would mark a transformation, the beginning of a path that would lead them from the Emperor's most devoted weapons to something far darker. The Warhounds would cease to exist, reborn as the World Eaters under the guidance of a primarch whose own wounds ran deeper than any could heal. But that was yet to come. For now, they remained the Emperor's loyal hounds of war, savage but disciplined, their blades wet with the blood of his enemies. Their hearts bound to his dream of a united humanity. The tale of Angron begins like that of all the Emperor's grandsons with a scattering. Whatever grand design the Master of Mankind had envisioned for his 20 primarchs was undone in a moment of vulnerability as the young demigods were cast through the rowing currents of the warp to distant worlds across the galaxy. This cosmic journey would shape each primarch in many different ways, but perhaps none more tragically than the infant who would become Angron. The infant primarch's gestation pod crashed upon the world of Nuceria, a planet whose technological advancement masked a society built upon cruelty and exploitation. The world was ruled by a wealthy elite who lived in opulence within walled city-states. While the masses existed in desperate poverty in the sprawling slums beyond, to distract the suffering populace from their misery and prevent rebellion. The ruling oligarchs, who called themselves High Riders, organized brutal gladiatorial games where cybernetically enhanced warriors fought and died for public entertainment. It was into this world that the young primarch arrived, landing in the northern mountains known as the Desalika Range. The exact circumstances of his discovery remain shrouded in mystery, but records suggest he was found by a slaver who stumbled upon the child, surrounded by the corpses of strange Xenos creatures. Some scholars believe these aliens were Alar, who had foreseen that the child would be a terrible plague upon the galaxy and sought to prevent it. If so, their attempt had failed, though they had succeeded in wounding the young primarch grievously before their deaths. The injured child was taken to Nuceria, the most prominent city-state on Nuceria, and sold to the ruling house Thala. Rather than recognizing the remarkable nature of their acquisition, they saw only a potential gladiator. The young primarch was thrown into a pit filled with hundreds of other slaves, with acid slowly rising from the bottom. To the raucous cheers of spectators, the children were forced to climb over one another to avoid the burning liquid, fighting for limited space on a central platform. Only the primarch survived this first cruel test. Named Angron, child of the mountain, by his new masters, the young primarch was nursed back to health and prepared for a life in the fighting pits. Despite his youth, he grew rapidly to an imposing size, as was the nature of the Emperor's gene sons. Within months, he had become a formidable gladiator, known to the bloodthirsty crowds as the Lord of the Red Sands. In the arenas of Desiree, Angron revealed not just physical prowess, but a profound sense of honor that set him apart from other gladiators. He killed when necessary, but would spare opponents who fought well, an unusual mercy in the blood-soaked pits. The crowds adored him for his skill and unpredictability, nicknaming him the Unbeaten as his victories mounted. Yet beneath the love of the masses, Angron nursed a smoldering resentment for his enslavement. Despite seeming to thrive in the gladiatorial lifestyle, he made numerous escape attempts, each one thwarted by the advanced technology and overwhelming numbers of his masters. Each failed attempt resulted in brutal punishment, but did nothing to extinguish the fire of defiance within him. During these formative years, Angron formed a deep bond with an older gladiator named Onomi, who became a mentor and father figure to the young warrior. Together, they became an unstoppable pair in the arenas, culminating in a spectacular victory against a pair of cybernetically enhanced Angron fighters, massive abhuman brutes who normally outmatched any human opponent. This triumph, however, led to a cruel twist of fate. The High Riders, ever seeking more spectacular entertainment, commanded that Angron and Onom fight each other to the death. It was a common practice designed to prevent gladiators from forming bonds that might lead to rebellion. When Angron refused, openly defying and insulting his masters, they decided on a punishment that would forever alter his destiny. The device they chose was known as the Butcher's Nails, primitive cybernetic implants dating back to the dark age of technology that would be hammered directly into his cerebral cortex. These neural implants were designed to heighten aggression and combat prowess by stimulating the brain's pleasure centers exclusively during moments of violence and rage. All other emotions, joy, contentment, affection, even the simple absence of pain were dulled or eliminated entirely. The surgery was performed against Angron's, with the crude implants literally hammered into his skull. For most recipients, the procedure was agonizing and often fatal. That Angron survived at all was due to his primarch physiology, though even his healing abilities could not fully compensate for the damage done. The effects were immediate. The nails rewrote Angron's neural pathways, creating an artificial addiction to violence. Every moment not spent killing became increasingly painful, while the act of bloodshed brought the only relief his damaged mind could now experience. The simple pleasures of existence, a moment of peace, a friendly touch, even restful sleep, were forever denied to him, replaced by a constant gnawing agony that could only be temporarily silenced through violence. In their cruel calculus, the High Riders made one terrible miscalculation. In their first demonstration of Angron's new implants, they pitted him against Onamia's, expecting the nails to override any lingering affection. The plan worked all too well. Angron, driven by artificial rage, tore his mentor apart in a berserker frenzy. When the bloodlust faded like a receding tide, leaving behind a wasteland of realization as Angron stared down at his brother's broken form, the warm weight of Animaus, corpse cradled in his arms still trembling with the aftershocks of violence. His howl of grief ripped through the mountain air, a raw animal sound that scraped the sky raw, echoing across the canyons for days until his throat bled and the rocks themselves seemed to weep in answer. That moment clarity cut through the nails, buzzing static a cold, sharp blade of understanding. His hatred for the High Riders, once a simmering ember in his gut, crystallized into something harder than adamantium, colder than the void between stars. They had taken everything, even his capacity to protect those he loved. Now their debt would be paid, not just for the chains around his wrists, but for Unau's laugh silenced forever, for every slave dragged into the crimson mud of the arena's gutters. The nails, those crude spikes of agony hammered into his skull by butchers playing at gods, twisted his pain into a weapon far deadlier than even the pit masters had imagined. Where Angron had once fought with the lethal grace Animus had carved into his bones, he now moved like a force of Nuceria whirlwind of gore and fury, every strike unrestrained, every defense abandoned to the implants, screaming demand for violence. The crowds adored it, their roars washing over him like a physical thing, chanting his title like a prayer to the god of slaughter they'd created, Lord of the Red Sands. But beneath the accolades, the nails chewed deeper into his mind, fraying the edges of his thoughts, the crude technology never meant for a being of his unfathomable complexity. The pain was a constant companion, a white-hot brand searing his sanity away, leaving only his iron will and the icy knot of vengeance to moor him to reason. Between bouts when the arena's stink of blood and sweat clung to his skin like a second layer, Angron spoke in whispers to the broken men and women chained alongside him. His words were not kind they couldn't be, not with the nails gnawing at his compassion, but they were true. He spoke of graves dug shallow and deep, of silence beneath the high riders, boot heels, and slowly, despite the fear, despite the risk, the gladiators listened. They saw in him not just a killer, but a symbol, a chance to repay their own agonies in kind. Among them, bonds formed in the dark-shared glances over sharpening stones, the press of a shoulder during a lash's bite, the unspoken promise that if they fell, they'd fall facing their captors. The rebellion took root in those cracks of stolen time, fed by Angron's cold fury and the desperate hope of those who'd known nothing but the whip's kiss. He knew escape was impossible alone. The High Rider's web of watchful machines and cruel ingenuity had taught him that through 100 failed attempts. But an Uprisingga, that was a blade they hadn't expected him to forge. The grandest games in Nucerian history provided the perfect anvil. When the roar of the crowd rose to a deafening crescendo, a wall of sound thick enough to drown out orders, Angron's signal came a single, guttural bellow ripped from his ravaged throat. In an instant, the arena became a slaughterhouse, the gladiators turning their weapons not on each other, but on their overseers. Blades meant for spectacle found throats, chains became garrots, and the sands drank deeply. Firearms barked, cutting down slaves by the dozen, but sheer, desperate ferocity carried the day. The survivors, a ragged river of freed death, flooded into Decia's streets, scavenging weapons before vanishing into the northern peaks where Angron's saga had first begun a bitter poetry, his cradle now his fortress. The mountains welcomed them with jagged teeth and whispering winds. They named themselves the Eaters of Cities, a title dripping with defiance and dark promise. For years, they waged war from the high places, striking like vipers before melting back into the stone, leaving only ruin and the High Rider's rage behind. Each ambush, each shattered convoy was a symphony composed by Angron, a brutal harmony of primarch intellect and the nail's feral cunning. He read the enemy's moves before their generals did, turning their arrogance against them, painting the passes red with their blood. But victories couldn't fill empty bellies or mend shattered limbs. Slowly, inevitably, their numbers dwindled from 2,000 to a hardened 1,000, their faces gaunt but their eyes alight with a faith that bordered on the fanatical. To them, Angron wasn't merely a leader, he was salvation made flesh, a dark messiah who'd given meaning to their suffering. And in rare moments, when the nail's bite eased to a dull throb, Angron found solace in their ragged fellowship. They were his true kin, bound not by blood but by shared scars, and in their presence the raging storm within him stilled to a bearable tempest. Then came Fedon More, and with it the end. 7 armies converged on the desolate ridge of Decilion, a noose tightening around the rebels' last breath. Angron knew the numbers, knew the futility, but surrender was a word carved from a language he'd forgotten. Instead, he ordered graves do a gesture of finality, each shovel strike a vow etched into the earth. They would die free or they would not die at all. As dawn stained the horizon blood-red, a figure descended in a blaze of golden light, haloed by silent giants in burnished armor. The Emperor's offer rang hollow in Angron's Horus Legion, a crusade, a destiny not chosen but imposed. He refused, his words granitehard. He would die with his brothers and sisters, not abandon them to a distant tyrant's dream. The Emperor acquiesced, or so it seemed. As the first war horns echoed at sunrise, Angron was torn from the battlefield in a gut-wrenching rush of light, rematerializing aboard a ship that stank of sterile ambition. Through the viewport, he watched it helpless, screaming as Decilion became a charnel house, his family butchered to the last, their graves filled not by choice but by Nucerian steel. The Emperor's explanation was ice-wrapped in velvet, a grand design, a cosmic scale where rebels were but dust on the balance. To Angron, it was sacrilege. The man who claimed to be his father had preserved his body only to murder his soul. He was no sant was a relic, a weapon stripped of its purpose, now shackled to a cause as alien to him as mercy was to the nails. When he finally stood before the warhounds, these strangers in cobalt and ivory who hailed him as father, their reverence curdled in his throat. They approached with hymns on their lips, their eyes shining with worship, and Angron saw only chains, only fresh betrayals waiting to be born. He struck the first to kneel before him, crushing transhuman bone like kindling, painting the mustering hall in arterial red. Their shock was a tangible thing, thick as the blood pooling at his feet. These weren't his siblings of the mountain, they were ghosts wearing his face, reminders of the family stolen from him. The Emperor had promised him a legion, but what Angron embraced was damnation. He would lead them, yes, into darkness, into rage, into a butchery that would make Nuceria's arenas seem like child's play. They would become his eaters of cities writ large, his wrath given legion form, and in their wake worlds would burn. The warhounds vanished that day, swallowed by the beast Angron unleashed. In their place rose the world eaters, and with them the first cracks in an empire built on lies. The nails sang their approval chorus of shrieking metal that drowned out the memories of laughter around campfires, of graves dug in solidarity, of a brother's dying breath. All that remained was the red haze, the promise of vengeance, and the certain knowledge that one day, the Emperor would learn the cost of stealing a primarch's right to die. The rejection struck like a blade between the ribs, deeper than any physical wound, leaving the warhounds gasping in the vacuum of their primarch's contempt. Decades of devotion turned to ashes in their mouths, generations bred to venerate this absent father, molded in the brutal image they imagined he would embody, only to find their very existence an affront to him. Angron's dismissal radiated like heat from a cooling corpse, a tangible force pressing against warplate as his genetic sons knelt before the broken god whose blood sang in their veins. Some burned with humiliation, fists clenching in the shadows of training cages where they'd practiced what they believed were his killing arts. Others stared numbly at Geneskins proving their lineage, questioning what flaw in their essence repelled this berserker demigod. Yet beneath fury and confusion hummed a desperate determination, the instinct of lost children clawing toward an abusive parent, unable to sever dark umbilical ties. Leadership fissures widened as whispers spread through the fleet. Ibrahim Greer, their steadfast commander for 30 blood-soaked years, vanished like smoke after confronting the Primarch. No death certificate graced official scrolls, no funeral rites echoed through the vaulted chambers of the flagship. Only the metallic scent of absence lingered where Greer once stood, a silent testament to those foolhardy enough to approach Angron's throne. The Legion fractured beneath this double hemorrhage, their father's rejection, colliding with their master's disappearance, creating fault lines that threatened to shatter discipline into warring shards. Captains jostled for control, scarred veterans of compliance campaigns, whose honor scars glittered like false constellations, each lacking the gravity to pull the Legion's disparate elements into orbit. Arguments over doctrine echoed through stratagem chambers, as old Terrans clashed with younger recruits forged on frontier wars, both factions adrift in the yawning silence where a commander's voice should resonate. Amidst this discord, one warrior moved quietly through the shadows of collapsing Order Khn of the 8th Assault Company, whose deeds stained no victory banners, whose command rank sat humbly mid-tier in the Legion hierarchy. Observant eyes noted how this quiet captain studied Angron not as a demigod to be worshipped nor a beast to be tamed, but as a puzzle bleeding at its edges, a portrait in pain framed by cables biting into a tortured skull. Where others saw only the nail's frenzy, Khn traced the shape of an absence underneath the phantom limbs of butchered gladiator brothers, the ghost weight of slave chins, the echoing silence where a family's laughter once warmed Nuceria's dust. When armored delegations marched to Angron's sanctum with declarations of fealty or challenges to single combat, they returned as crimson smears across bulkheads. Khn prepared differently. He entered the dragon's lair clad only in penitent's robes, the scent of oil and sour sweat rising from unwashed fabric as he disabled his armor's life support couplings. The clank of greaves hitting the deck echoed like funeral bells, followed by gauntlets, pauldrons, breastplate, each piece of ceramite peeled away until only flesh and humility remained. Ship's rumor described the meeting in fragments, a guttural snarl like tectonic plates grinding, the wet snap of breaking bones resonating through adamantium doors. Surgeons later cataloged Khn's injuries with clinical horror, ribs splintered to bone shrapnel, lungs collapsed into blood-filled sacs, genocide pulsing weakly beneath a chest cratered by fist impacts. Yet for all the anatomical devastation, two details burned brightest in the apothecarian's glare: Khn lived, and Angron had stayed his hand from a killing blow. The revelation rippled through the ranks like shockwaves from an orbital strike. The broken captain lingered at death's threshold for solar weeks, Susan membranes cycling between coma and agonized wakefulness as Osmajula and Laram and cells struggled against damage no space marine should survive. During these fevered intervals, scouts guarding his chamber heard fragmented pleas muttered through shattered teeth, not for salvation, but for understanding. "They are my brothers, see your sons." Across the fleet, Angron paced like a caged predator, his rampages ceasing as abruptly as they'd begun. He stalked training decks where warhounds drilled in the Emperor's prescribed combat forms, massive fists clenching at the staccato precision of bolter drills. For the first time, Jennison's noticed yellowed eyes following their movements, not the glazed fury of Nailshurge, but something colder, sharper, an evaluation. Where KHN's brothers had presented crisp parade-ground formations, the captain from Nocturne's ash wastes had shared something far darker, not obedience, but recognition. He'd mirrored Angron's native tongue of violence, not in challenge, but communion, invoking the Changang cant scratched onto Nuceria's prison walls, recounting legends of doomed rebel kings who spat blood into slave masters' eyes. Most crucially, he acknowledged the screaming void, where Angron's chosen siblings had been torn away, not with the Emperor's dismissive assurance of replacements, nor with hollow platitudes of duty, but with the shared silence of warriors who know certain wounds never scar. As KHN's lungs reinflated and synaptic pathways reforged, Angron's gaze began lingering on Genesoldiers coated in training cage muck, recognizing familiar contours in their bloodied knuckles and exhaustion-slurred laughter. This fragile bridge birthed painful progress. KHN, face still mottled with subdermal bruising, limped at his primarch's side, translating blood-soaked instincts into tactical doctrine. Where Angron growled about pit tactics, KHN codified close-quarter emphasis on Chain X mastery. When the demigod sneered at flanking maneuvers as slaves' tricks, the captain reframed encircling maneuvers as arena envelopments. Slowly, carefully, the warhounds learned their father's language of pain. Training circles replaced parade grounds, brothers battering each other senseless with Angron's favored techniques, disarming strikes aimed at weapon wrists, grappling throws onto broken terrain. The Primarch's approval manifested not in praise, but in fewer skulls crushed during inspections. It was Captain Dreiger, grizzled Terran veteran bloodying his fists in the new combat pits, who let slip the phrase that would birth a legion's rebirth. "We are but citiators now," he laughed through split lips after flattening a Sithonian recruit. "Under Angron, we'll devour worlds." The words struck the Primarch like a hammer upon forgemetal. From his scars rose the ghost of Genna's rebellion, where gladiator battalions had earned their title as eaters of cities before dying beneath mountain bombardments. To that corpse heap of broken brothers, Angron pledged this living legion, no longer warhounds sniffing meekly at their master's heel, but world eaters whose hunger would eclipse even his lost kin's fury. Galley scribes captured Angron's bellowed decree during a feast where ceramite fists slammed tables in rhythm. "Bring me artificers. Let the galaxy see what comes with teeth bared." Ship's artisans labored beneath the Primarch's fevered gaze as he clawed through rejected drafts, howling at timid suggestions to retain canine motifs. The final icon emerged scarred and terrible, a fanged maw unhinged to swallow planets whole, rendered in stark relief against the Legion's ancestral white and blue. Yet as companies repainted their armor, ruby accents bloomed like hemorrhage stains across their warplate, as if the Legion bled through its own heraldry. Resistance surfaced immediately. Terran veterans from the Unity Wars refused to discard the Hound's sigil, some concealing old icons beneath fresh battle damage to proclaim loyalty to discarded traditions. Angron's answer came not through orders, but raw examples striding into their training cages to dismantle dissenters with bare hands. He left champions crippled but breathing, broken flesh, testifying to the new reality, adapt or be crushed by the approaching storm. This violent communion bred stranger rights. Before the Geophalian compliance, warriors gathered in armored circles to slice palms with combat blades, smearing crimson streaks across helmet faceplates, blood rites binding them as Nucerian pitfighters once did. Skull totems clattered on armor belts, honor marks tallying kills in crude numeracy that would have shamed Luna Wolf tacticians. Engineers refitted dropods with frontal rams to replicate Angron's beloved death descents. Armor squads disemboweled transports to fight as nail-sharpened spearheads, tearing into enemy formations like chain X's through flesh. Yet KHN continued tempering the Legion's spiral, steering Angron toward tactical purpose amidst the gathering frenzy, his unmodified mind retaining sanity long enough to anchor campaigns. At the Primarch's elbow during assault musters, the captain reminded rage-blinded commanders of supply lines, pressed slagged vox discs holding casualty estimates into brass-knuckled fists, whispered counsel while butchered corpses cooled around them. His presence became the Legion's keel, a warped conscience preventing total dissolution into the storm. But Angron demanded deeper communion. Observing how Jennison's recoiled from his agony, the nails buried in his cranium flaring with neural lightning during strategy briefings, he summoned Apothecary Surlac from the butchery of Medici Dex. Make them as I am. The order hung in antiseptic-scented air like an execution order. Let them know peace. Surlac's initial efforts bordered on grisly farce prototype nails shredded Astartes' brains into neural porridge, cerebral fluid flooding surgical cradles, hyperactive Susan glands maintaining trapped consciousness as minds unraveled. Angron attended every autopsy, decreeing each corpse worthy of Templum Gloria interment, their names carved into walls where Greer's memorial should have stood. His logic was pitilessly simple. Noble failures proved commitment, each screaming death a step toward shared divinity. None dared voice the obvious heresy. Mortal physiology couldn't survive what cursed archaeotech could inflict upon a primarch. Salvation sprang from an unexpected quarter, the second compliance of Jaina, where defeated separatists possessed Psychnoine mind shackles intended to pacify Angron's forces. Though insidious and crude, Surlac recognized synaptic patterns matching Nail's data streams. His scalpels dissected rebel corpses, while World Eaters executed the populace below deck's desperate hands fusing xenocircuitry with captured tech. When KHN volunteered for the first successful implantation, the apothecary approached with trepidation. Did even this paragon understand the sacrifice? It's not sacrifice, KHN whispered as drills bit into his cranium. It's translation. Nails awoke with an electric scream, his convulsing body held down by command squad battle brothers. Eyes flickered between lucid intelligence and animal hunger, the same damnation Dance witnessed in Angron. Those first solar weeks showed devastating change, KHN abandoning stratagem sessions to bleed rage in training cages, weeping bloody tears during lucid intervals, reciting casualty figures with mechanical detachment before lapsing into howls that shook command deck viewports. Yet he endured. He fought, and Angron watched his mirror flame flicker with something approaching warmth. Acceptance cascaded through the Legion like Prometheum ignition. Veterans of Ghoulstar's campaigns lined up to share their father's curse, all thought of resistance drowned out by the choir's approving roar. A grotesque communion spread through the ranks, scalpels exposing cerebellar tissue, drills shrieking through ceramide-reinforced bone, serfs mopping gore-soaked decks as Jennison's rose twitching from surgical slabs. Only two segments held back. The old Terrans Greer's generation huddled in isolated training bays, retching when hearing Nail's communion chatter where battle hymns once sounded. The librarius fared worse. Those eager to bond with their genocide discovered that the nails reacted to psychic energy like glass to hammers. One lexicanum attempted implantation during the Gaspak's annihilation. His head detonated above the trenches, brain matter showering both loyalists and rebels. Survivors hid their gifts, becoming outcasts among brothers they'd led through warp storms. Identity crystallized amidst this pain-painted metamorphosis. Forward assaults eclipsed tactical nuanced drawpods, screamed through void shields to disgorge frothing berserkers into command bastions. Leaders abandoned strategic plotting for raw carnage metrics, tallying skulls taken rather than objectives achieved. KHN himself descended into the crucible. Last vestiges of diplomacy burned away. He now translated Angron's fury rather than tempering it, chainsaw logic cutting through battlefield hesitation. Yet even as neural decay clouded his eyes, a flicker remained clutching Apothecary Surlac's elbow after one command slaughter to whisper, "Note their faint pattern, we outflank," before spasming into Nail's shock. Blood rituals flowered like corpse orchids aboard the Conqueror. Skull-faced warriors slashed palms before battle. Genetic curses scrawled in blood runes across enemy banners. Training pits resounded not with sparring, but death duels fought on Angron's gladiatorial terms. Ceremonial weapons discarded once first blood flowed in favor of Teuton nail savagery. Bonds rotted between brothers who once debated philosophy mid-campaign now. Shared killing surges fulfilled the need for communion. When fleet elements boarded Orc rocks during the Daka purges, Vox generals carried no discussion of tactics, only the wet sounds of chainteeth meeting green flesh. The final seal upon their damnation came not from Angron, but through KHN's decaying influence. Emulating their spiritual father, he pressed Surlac for enhanced nail models, ones integrating psychically reactive circuits from Jaina's mind shackles. "Let our pain fuel their suffering," he rasped during implantation surgery, neural shunts bleeding energy straight into power weapons. Thus the butcher's surgeons rose nail-scrazed apothecaries wielding power scalpels that feasted on agony, sowing synaptic torment even as they harvested genocide. With this grim inception, the last warhounds perished not in combat, but beneath their brothers' scalpels. What remained was a brotherhood unified like never before, a howling singularity of pain, orbiting Angron as planets whirl around a dying star. The galaxy would soon learn the cost of forcing unity through shared suffering. As the World Eaters descended like a chain-axe blow upon complacent civilizations, a legion reborn in grief, baptized in butchery, thriving only when bathed in enemy blood, and bringing their father's shattered soul one step closer to finding oblivion at last. The Legion's identity hardened like scar tissue over an unhealed wound, its once-disciplined fury curdling into something savage and unrelenting. Where disputes had once been settled through rigorous debate or the ritualized clatter of practiced blades, they now ended in abrupt, gory finality knives drawn in shadowed corridors, chain axes roaring to life over insulted honor. Authority resided not in the theoretical hierarchy of rank, but in the visceral truth of strength. A captain commanded only so long as his fist remained the hardest, his reflexes the sharpest. And yet, paradoxically, this descent honed the 12th into one of the Great Crusade's most terrifyingly effective instruments. Worlds trembled at their approach, entire systems offering immediate capitulation rather than face the butchers who left nothing but blood-churned mud and pyramids of skulls in their wake. Those foolish enough to resist learned the finality of Angron's leçon against the unleashed fury of his sons. Defiance was but a prelude to extinction. Beneath this veneer of conquest, however, festered a rot as old as Angron's own torment. The butcher's nails, those barbed gifts nestled deep within their brains, rewrote them synapse by synapse. Memories of Terra's drill yards, of the proud brotherhood that had once defined the war hounds, frayed like rotten cordage, replaced by a grinding, eternal, present and endless cycle of pain seeking release in violence. What remained of their fraternity was no longer trust, but the feral resonance of a pack scenting blood. They hounded the galaxy not as brothers, but as addicts chasing the same crimson fix, each kill a fleeting salve for the nail's ceaseless bite. Angron watched their devolution with a terrible, wounded pride. If he could not be free of his own gnawing torment, then let his sons share it. Let them understand the price of breathing while metal claws shredded their thoughts. Let them find, as he did, that only in the act of killing did the agony briefly loosen its grip. They would inherit nothing of the Emperor's sterile ambition instead. They would embody his own truest legacy, forged in Nuceria's slave pits and baptized in the weeping blood of gladiators. In this, they unknowably shaped themselves into perfect vessels for a darker master, one whose throne drank deeply from rivers of slaughter, whose shadow stretched across the galaxy, waiting to claim what the Imperium had so recklessly sharpened. The Legion's coming was heralded by the shrieking of splitting atmospheres and the stench of promethium igniting in screaming plumes. Their early campaigns after Angron's ascension became grotesque parables of liberation twisted by unbridled rage. Take Nov Shendak, where they fell upon a xeno species that had entombed human colonists beneath mountains of alien stone. Another primarch might have seen desperate slaves, scabbed with labor and hollowed by despair, and felt kinship. Angron saw only the mocking echo of his own shackled past. The Ultramarines and Word-bearers, arrayed in disciplined ranks, planned their assault with tactical hololiths and methodical siege protocols. The World Eaters needed no such artifice. They plunged into the chthonic darkness like starving beasts, the nails hissing within their skulls as they tore through the Xeno's lines with a ferocity that chilled even their Astartes kin. When they emerged, their armor wept alien gore beneath pallid sunlight, cradling dazed mortals in ceramite-sheathed arms. The slaves stared up, trembling, their expressions caught between gratitude and raw instinctive terror. Were these their saviors, or merely new predators, hungrier and infinitely more lethal? The pattern repeated campaign after campaign. Carus Tertius became a charnel monument to Angron's philosophy. Ordered to quell a rebellion, the World Eaters drowned the world in blood, butchering rebels and civilians with indiscriminate frenzy. When challenged, Angron merely gestured at the compliant sigil blinking green atop Imperial charts. Results were justification swift, total, unambiguous. On Geral's crystal plains, they shattered a culture glimmering with forbidden technology, their ranks withering under searing beams to close with blades and fists. Dying World Eaters died grinning, for was this not the Nail's sacred demand? To end drowning in the hot rush of slaughter, feeling that blessed fleeting silence amid the screaming. Yet it was the Aragata cleansing that severed tenuous bonds with their kin. Beside Robot Guilliman's measured brilliance, the 12th embraced atrocity as sacrament. The basalt citadel's walls grimaced down at them, thick with las cannons in defiance. The World Eaters' answer, a ramp of their own dead. They clambered over brothers still twitching with residual nervifire, mockery and blood froth bubbling from their helms, and once inside, sanctified their victory with relentless butchery. Guilliman beheld their handiwork smoldering civilian corpses stacked like cordwood beside warriors. Execution rounds punched into Templar bone sand recoiled. Where he saw dishonor, Angron saw purity. Where Guilliman mourned waste, the Red Angel crowned outcome as king. The rift never healed. The Lord of Ultramar marked the 12th as a festering blight upon the Crusade's ideals, his warnings echoing uselessly in stratagem chambers where cold pragmatists noted only compliance rates spiking wherever the World Eater's shadow fell. Within the Legion, victories hollowed them. the nails chewed deeper, shredding coherence between deployments. Veterans convulsed on deck plates, fingers scrabbling at implants that pulsed like infected teeth. Some degenerated into howling berserkers, contained in cells scrawled with their own filth. Others carved prayers into their flesh with combat knives, seeking pain to drown deeper pain, or danced ceaselessly in sparring cages turned abattoirs, their boots skidding in visceraslic. Apothecaries documented minds fraying, neurophysiology collapsing, genocide rejecting its hosts in oily eruptions of black bile. These reports dutifully collated, Angron cast into the conqueror's furnace. Suffering wasn't failure, but winnowing the weak fell, and those who survived, tempered by agony, became truth. Gennate's Ignatian 93,115 crystallized their damnation, a small, sickly world clinging to survival via blasphemy, genetic tampering, and silicon mines. Imperial oversight vanished overnight. The 12th's response was typical. Angron imposed his time, drawn from darkest memory, 31 Terran hours, a mirrored echo of the longest fight in Nuceria's pits. Failure meant decimation. Centurion Mago Call, a Terraborn relic increasingly haunted by what his legion birthed, led the assault. Reconnaissance was minimal, strategy abandoned in the scramble to meet the Red Angel's dictate. Beneath Jenna's surface, they found their doom. Billions of uncanny mock-humans, puppet bodies for a dwindling few trueborn survivors. This mindless tide drowned the world eaters in synthetic flesh, for every synthetic body mangled by chainsword teeth. 100 scuttled forward, dragging even Astartes beneath their suffocating mass. The deadline passed with Jenna unconquered. What followed fractured the Legion irrevocably. Back aboard the Conqueror, decimation loomed. Mago refused. Not the Order refused. Angron himself, spitting that the Primarch's tyranny mirrored the slavemasters he so despised. When commanded to execute the first condemned brother, Mago locked gazes with his Genefather and let his blade clatter to the deck. Angron's fury was seismic. Brothers died then, not by decimation's cold equation, but in a hurricane of Primarch steel, torn limb from limb, until the Conqueror's halls ran slick with transhuman blood. Only the sacrifice of choking librarians, their psi-hoods bursting like overripe fruit, dragged Angron into temporary oblivion, leaving his legion leaderless and bleeding. It was then that Apothecary Gareth revealed his profane triumph: new nails, refined using Xenoshrecy extracted from Jenna's ruins. Mago's loyalists recoiled, seeing final damnation. The younger, nailspit majority welcomed obliteration's kiss. When Angron awoke, encased in restraint fields and humming with suppressed wrath, the schism exploded into fratricide. Mago, struggling to preserve some shard of the Legion's tattered honor, confronted Khorne Sebrother, now nails-ridden apostle of annihilation. Their duel was short, brutal. Geist's improved nails made Khorne a storm of whirling Gorchal teeth, leaving Mago broken at Angron's feet. The dying Centurion's final words rang like prophecy: "We are already damned." What followed on Jenna's surface wasn't war, but extermination perfected. Legionaries with nails shrieking at full shriek tore through simulacra and Trueborn alike, tracing puppet masters to their final redoubt vault where the last 1,000 Genon Trueborn huddled, minds connected to the surrogate swarm without. Their pleas that this was survival, transcendent and peaceful, were met with Khorne's roaring chain axe. The 12th scoured the world, leaving not one stone stacked upon another. Astropaths drowned in the psychic backwash of a civilization's death agony, their screams bleeding across subsector borders. Jenna's ashes cooled as condemnation from Terra finally cascaded down through the warp. The Emperor's patient Snaplemon Russ and his Vielka Fenrica descended upon Malva VII, where the World Eaters stood amid Jenna's still-smoking ruins. Russ's fleet pierced the clouds like ice-sheathed daggers, the wolves arrayed in immaculate lines, armor gleaming cold beneath a bruised sky. Across the blasted field, the 12th coalesced into a jagged, blood-stained shadow, their formations ragged, their plate etched with scars fresh and oldsome from the enemy, many more from each other. Russ strode forward, Mjalnar alive with frost lightning, his gaze locked upon Angron's hunched silhouette. Between them lay more than empty ground. It was the gulf between imperial truth and the bloody reality the World Eaters embodied. The galaxy held its breath. Blood called to blood. The reckoning had come. The air of Genna tasted of metal and ash, thick with the promise of violence, as two demigods stood amidst the ruins their sons had made. Angron's breaths came labored, each inhalation a rattling struggle against the jagged edges of the butcher's nails, biting ever deeper into his mind. Blood wept from fresh wounds across his colossal frame, pooling at his feet in steaming testament to wounds that would have slain a lesser being thrice over. In his grip, Widowmaker, that great scarred axe he'd carried since the Emperor first bound him in chains, hummed with restless weight, its edge thirsty for the only solace it had ever known. Across the ravaged ground, Lemon Russ stood equally battered yet unbowed, the solemn stillness of his bearing at odds with the feral cunning burning in his ice-blue eyes. Between them stretched an abyss no oath could bridge, the executioner bound by loyalty's unyielding chain, the Red Angel shackled only by his endless, gnawing rage. Russ spoke the Emperor's will with the grim finality of a verdict carved in stone: cease the massacres, halt the nails, corrupting spread, return to Terra for tearing knives to pluck the cursed machinery from legionary skulls. Each word struck Angron like a lash, awakening memories of guilt-draped tyrants delivering verdicts from high balconies as his brothers died chained below. Here stood another master, bearing another collar disguised as salvation. Emperor's theft of his chosen end on Nuceria festered anew in his gut, a poison no amount of blood could purge. His sons shifted behind him, their own nails singing the siren song of imminent violence, their helms already smeared crimson in crude mimicry of the blood rites practiced in forgotten arenas. Across the ashen field, the space wolves answered with low growls that rumbled through ceramite, blades easing from sheaths with serpentine hisses. No order was given. No command could have stopped what followed. The world dissolved into concussive thunder and screaming metal. Boltrons tore through ancient stone as Centuribrothers became butchers, fanged chain-axes meeting frost-etched blades in cascades of sparks brighter than any dying star. Imperial archives would later name it the Genna scouring, sterile ink blotting out the truth. Brother killing brother under skies choked with the smoke of sacred banners set aflame. To those who survived, it burned as the night of the wolf, not a battle, but a primal fury that swallowed all reason, all honor, until naught remained but the wet crunch of ceramite collapsing under frenzied blows, the keening wail of transhuman warriors reduced to beasts. Angron moved through the carnage like a force of ruined nature, Widowmaker rising, and falling in arcs that cleaved Terminators in twain, each killing stroke punctuated by snarled hatred. Russ answered with predatory cunning, ducking beneath the maelstrom of Angron's fury to land brutal counterstrikes that shattered ribs and peeled flesh from bone. Yet for all their godlike wrath, neither could land the killing blow. Widowmaker met Frostfang in a detonation of force that shattered the great axe's haft, sending its murderous head spinning into the mud like a fallen star. Silence fell like a shroud over fields drowned in blood and oil, severed genocide glistening amidst the wreckage of war machines. Russ withdrew, his wolves limping at his heels, victory unclaimed. Angron stood amidst his mangled sons, the splintered remnant of his axe trembling in his grip not in sorrow, but in fresh, incandescent fury. This hollow standoff changed nothing, proved nothing save that the galaxy held no chains strong enough to leash his rage. Compliance, submission, the very words curdled in his mouth like coward's bile. That night, as apothecaries harvested progenites from the dead, Angron roared new commandments into the Vox. The nails' embrace would no longer be a choice. Surgeons worked until their fingers bled, drilling the hateful machinery into every warrior not essential to the Legion's function. Resistance was met not with punishment, but pity. What brother would deny another the sweet relief from thought, from doubt, from the hollow ache between battles? Guilliman's prim disapprovals echoed from distant muster fields, lamenting their butchers' ways while his own pristine legions conquered worlds through ledgers and legislation. Let him choke on his rhetoric. What use were ideals to those whose veins burned with the need to rend and tear? Sanguinius offered sorrowful glances laced with recognition, his own angels trembling on the knife's edge of a different hunger. Their delicacy sickened Angron. To deny one's nature was the ultimate cowardice. Even Vulcan's stolid attempts at kinship curdled beneath the nails' incessant drone. Pity, the very notion, was an insult spat upon his brothers' graves. Across the stratagem tables of the burgeoning Warmaster, however, fresh calculations took shape. Horus watched the Red Angel's festering isolation with predator's eyes, tallying grievances like currency. Where others saw a broken weapon, he saw a blade honed for a singular, crimson purpose. Their encounters grew frequent, laced with quiet words that slipped like poison through the cracks in Angron's fractured psyche. "He stole your death," Horus murmured during feigned bouts of brotherly sparring, their fists clashing with deceptive camaraderie. "Denied you the warrior's end beside those who bled for you. What father does this? What king but a tyrant?" The words coiled around the nail's shrill scream, amplifying it, giving focus to the formless rage. The Legion felt the shift in their genocide, his tremors worsening, blackouts leaving him roaring challenges at phantoms only he could see. Apothecaries whispered terrified prognostications the nails could not be excised, had replaced whole swathes of cortical tissue in his divine brain. Yet they offered Angron this grim truth only once. He laughed, the sound wet and broken, before returning to the sparring cages, savage blows punishing the empty air where a golden oppressor might have stood. Blood rituals became sacrament, warriors slicing open palms before each engagement, smearing life's vidi across battleplate in patterns that unconsciously mirrored eightfold paths. Where once the World Eaters had fought for Terra's distant dream, now they carved through compliance campaigns with single-minded fury, seeking only those fleeting moments when combat's roar drowned out the nail's shriek. Imperial army auxiliaries fled their approach, terror overriding loyalty at the sight of chain axes revving in welcome. "Brothers in blood," Angron would bellow as drop pods screamed planetward, his voice raw with synthetic agony. "Let the galaxy tremble, let the bones pile high as mountains." Campaigns blurred into massacres, compliant and rebellious worlds alike reduced to charnel pits where sculptures stood as the only monuments. Guilliman's protests grew shrill, his missives to Terra laced with frantic admonitions such destroyers served no empire, only entropy itself. But Terra remained silent. The Emperor's gaze had turned inward to secrets buried beneath the Himalayas, his inattention as damning as any decree. On murder-sated battlefields, under skies choked with promethium smoke, the World Eaters huddled around corpsifiers and felt the void where purpose once resided. Blood filled it warm, saltridge, screaming up at them from crimson mud in endless offering. Some began hearing whispers beneath the nails scream, promises of endless battlefields where the pain might cease. Angron hammered ceaselessly at his armor in those rare moments between wars, reshaping it as the nails bit deeper, hammering down the aquila, replacing laurels with chain-strapped vertebrae. His brothers' faded laughter from Nuceria's corpse-strewn mountains now woke him from blackout stupors, their faces finally clear of accusation. Instead, they always asked what future waited beyond the next kill. The answers lay coiled in Horus' patient whispers, offered over cups of bitter wine in starlit observation chambers. When the War Master's betrayal finally unfurled its wings, Angron listened to promises of father's death, of empires drowned in the blood of overseers, of battles unending on fields where skulls bloomed like flowers. The choice, if choice it could be named inside the prison of his mind, was no choice at all. For Angron and his sons, the heresy merely granted permission to become what they'd always been. The nails screamed yes, and the blood drivers flowed at last toward a throne no emperor would ever claim. Of a galaxy where warriors like Angron would be valued for their strength rather than constrained by the emperor's increasingly restrictive edicts. When Horus finally revealed his intentions to rebel against their father, Angron required little persuasion to join his cause. The Red Angel saw in Horus's rebellion a chance to finally break the chains that had bound him since his unwilling rescue from Nuceria. More than that, he saw an opportunity for vengeance against the father, who had never truly accepted him as he was. The 12th Legion followed their primarch into treachery without hesitation. For most World Eaters, loyalty to Angron far outweighed any abstract duty to a distant emperor they had never seen. Those who had received the Butcher's nails, now the vast majority of the Legion, found their capacity for independent thought diminished, their minds focused solely on battle and bloodshed. If Angron said they would now fight against the Imperium, then so be it. The enemy had changed, but the killing would continue. Not all within the World Eaters accepted this new path, however. A small minority, primarily those who had resisted implantation of the nails, questioned the wisdom of turning against the Imperium they had helped build. These dissenters kept their doubts private, knowing that open disagreement would be met with violence in a legion that increasingly settled all disputes with bloodshed. Horus was well aware of these potential loyalists within all the Traitor Legions. As he prepared for open rebellion, he recognized the need to purge these elements before they could undermine his plans. The solution was elegant in its cruelty. A single stroke that would both eliminate the threat of loyalist resistance and irrevocably bind the traitor allegiance to his cause through shared guilt. The plan centered on the world of Eastven III, a recently compliant planet that had fallen back into rebellion. Horus assigned the World Eaters, Death Guard, Emperor's children, and his own sons of Horus to crush this insurrection. But in secret, he instructed the primarchs of these legions to select those warriors whose loyalty to the Emperor might outweigh their loyalty to their immediate commanders. These suspected loyalists would form the first wave of the assault, deployed to the planet's surface while their treacherous brothers remained in orbit. For Angron, this selection process proved challenging. The Butcher's nails had blurred the lines of loyalty within his legion, making it difficult to determine who might resist the path of betrayal. In the end, he chose based on instinct and scattered reports from his captains, identifying those warriors who still spoke of the Emperor with reverence or who had resisted the implantation of the nails. Among those marked for death were some of the Legion's finest warriors. Veterans of 100 campaigns who had served since the days of the Warhounds found themselves assigned to the first drop. Unaware that their primarch had deemed them expendable, they went willingly, honored to be chosen for the spearhead assault, never suspecting the betrayal that awaited them. The initial landings on Eastvan III proceeded according to plan. The loyalist elements of the four legions made Planet 4 and engaged the rebel forces, quickly securing the primary objectives around the planetary capital of the Coral City as they voxed news of their success to the fleet, anticipating reinforcement. They received only ominous silence in return. Then came the betrayal. Without warning, virus bombs rained from the orbiting fleet, designed to scour all life from the planet's surface. Deadly Life Eater virus consumed everything organic it touched, reducing living tissue to a flammable slurry within minutes. Billions of East Van's civilian population died in those first moments, their deaths serving no purpose but to mask the murder of loyal Astartes. Yet even this carefully orchestrated treachery did not go perfectly to plan. Captain Sults of the Emperor's Children, having learned of the impending betrayal, managed to warn many of the loyalists before the bombardment began. These warriors took shelter in the most hardened structures they could find, using the sealed environment systems of their power armor to survive the viral apocalypse unleashed upon them. When a subsequent orbital bombardment ignited the atmosphere, turning the planet's surface into a sea of fire, enough loyalists survived to deny Horus his clean victory. Nearly 2/3 of the initial landing force endured both the virus and the firestorm, emerging from their shelters to find a charred wasteland where a thriving civilization had once stood. The survival of these loyalists presented Horus with a dilemma. Orbital bombardment had proven ineffective, but allowing them to live risked exposure of his rebellion before he was ready to announce it. The planet's atmosphere, choked with the lingering effects of the virus bombs, made precise orbital strikes impossible. The only solution was to finish the job on the ground, to send the traitors down to kill their former brothers face to face. It was Aang who forced this confrontation. Defying Horus' direct orders to wait until the atmosphere cleared enough for another bombardment, the Red Angel ordered his personal drop pod prepared. He would not be denied the satisfaction of killing his disloyal sons personally, of looking into their eyes as they realized the depth of his betrayal. 50 companies of World Eaters followed Angron to the surface, the largest contingent of any legion in the second wave. They made planetfall in the plaza districts west of the Presenter's Palace, their drop pods smashing through the ruined landscape like the fists of angry gods. The moment they emerged, they began hunting for their former brothers, following the scent of blood through the ash-choked streets. The loyalist World Eaters, realizing they had been marked for death by their own primarch, did not break or flee. Shaped by the same warrior culture that had molded their traitor kin, they chose to stand and fight against impossible odds. If they were to die, they would do so as true sons of Angron had always done, with weapons in hand. The resulting slaughter was intimate and terrible. Battle brothers who had once fought back-to-back against the enemies of mankind now turned their blades against each other. Warriors who had shared blood oaths and battlefield triumphs became murderers and victims. The butcher's nails, never designed to differentiate between one enemy and another, drove the traitor World Eaters into a frenzy that recognized no bonds of brotherhood or shared history. Angron himself moved through this killing field like the god of war he would one day become. His twin chain axes rose and fell in bloody arcs, reaping a tally of heads from both loyalist World Eaters and any other loyalist unfortunate enough to cross his path. The Primarch fought without strategy or restraint, a whirlwind of destruction that left nothing living in his wake. The loyalists fought with desperate courage, knowing there could be no victory or escape. Their only goal became taking as many traitors with them as possible, selling their lives at the highest price they could extract. Some achieved legendary feats in their final hours. Single warriors holding choke points against dozens of attackers. Small squads conducting hit-and-run attacks that bled the traitor forces for days. But for all their valor, the outcome was never in doubt. Cut off from reinforcement or resupply, the loyalists were gradually worn down by the overwhelming numbers arrayed against them. One by one, the pockets of resistance were isolated and eliminated until only scattered individuals remained, fighting alone amidst the ruins of what had once been a thriving world. The battle for Istvan III dragged on for nearly 2 months, far longer than Horus had anticipated. This delay disrupted his carefully planned timetable for rebellion, giving the loyal legions precious time to respond to the first confused reports of treachery that managed to escape the Istvan system. For Angron and his World Eaters, the extended campaign was a gift, an opportunity to indulge their blood'll last without restraint or purpose beyond the killing itself. By the time the last loyalist fell, the World Eaters had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. They had not merely betrayed their oaths to the Emperor, they had butchered their own brothers in violence that served no strategic purpose. Such actions could never be forgiven or explained away. The only path remaining was forward deeper into treachery and corruption. As the World Eaters returned to their ships, they left behind a dead world and the broken bodies of those who had remained true to their original purpose. But they carried with them something new, a taste for fraternal blood that would eventually transform them from space marines into something far darker. The legion that had once been the Emperor's executioners had become Horus's butchers, bound to the War Master not by loyalty, but by shared guilt and the absence of any alternative. For Angron, the massacre at Istvan III was neither victory nor defeat, but simply another battle in an endless war. He had killed those sons who clung to the Emperor's vision, and preserved those who accepted his own path of unrestrained violence. That this path led away from everything the Legion had once stood for concerned him not at all. The World Eaters would follow him into the darkness, and together they would carve their bloody legend across a galaxy in flames. The blood-soaked fields of Istvan marked only the beginning of the World Eaters' descent. As Horus consolidated his forces and prepared for the long march to terror, he recognized the need to secure his flanks against potential counterattack. The 500 worlds of Ultramar, domain of the Ultramarines Legion, presented the most significant threat to his eastern advance. These worlds must be neutralized, their strength broken, or at least contained before the War Master could safely turn his attention to the Imperial Throne World. For this crucial task, Horus selected two of his transformed brothers, Lager Aurelian of the Wordbearers and Angron of the World Eaters. An unlikely pairing, these primarchs represented opposite approaches to war. Lager, the spiritual architect of the heresy, approached conflict with reluctance and calculation. Angron knew only the direct path of slaughter, yet in this contrast lay potential. Lager's vision, guided by Angron's fury, might accomplish what neither could achieve alone. For Angron, the strategic objectives of the campaign held little interest. He cared nothing for Horus' grand designs or the theological underpinnings of Lager's newfound faith. His only concern was the opportunity for battle, for the blessed moments of clarity that came when the butcher's nails sang with the rhythm of combat. Each world brought fresh victims, new blood to spill in his endless quest for momentary relief from pain. The Shadow Crusade began with devastating effectiveness. The Wordbearers and World Eaters struck simultaneously at multiple systems, overwhelming planetary defenses before reinforcements could arrive. World after world fell to their combined might, with the Wordbearers securing compliance, while the World Eaters indulged their bloodlust among the population. It was a partnership of dark convenience, Lager gaining the martial strength he needed, while Angron received an endless supply of victims. On the Forge world of Armatura, the pattern of their cooperation revealed itself in full. The World Eaters launched a frontal assault on the primary Forgers, drawing the defending Ultramarines into direct combat, while the Wordbearers conducted their true objective: the placement of corrupt demonic devices that would later serve as anchors for a massive warp storm. The battle proved costly for the World Eaters, with many warriors lost when the Ultramarines collapsed entire HAB blocks upon them. But Angron cared nothing for such losses so long as the killing continued. It was during this engagement that Angron lost his twin-chain axes when they were damaged beyond repair in the brutal close-quarters fighting. The Primarch discarded the broken weapons without sentiment, focusing only on the next kill, the next moment of release. KHN, however, the fragments of the shattered axe lay cradled in Lorger's hands, cold even through his armored gauntlets, each jagged edge whispering of history and bitter irony. He studied the weapon's ruins with patient reverence, seeing beyond the damage wrought by Angron's unthinking fury to the deeper truth. It represented a weapon noble in intent, now broken by cruel circumstance, much like the brother who had discarded it. Meticulous reconstruction would follow, the fragments welded together with devotion no less consuming than hatred. Forged anew by Lorger's vision rather than Angron's blind rage, this reforged relic would become an icon of divine ascendance, a totem carried forth by future generations who would never know the flawed Primarch that had first wielded it. As the Shadow Crusade unfolded across the ravaged canvas of Ultramar, Lorger observed his brother's accelerating decline through eyes that saw beyond physical exhaustion into the fracturing soul beneath. The Butcher's nails' ravenous hunger devoured the Primarch's mind with terrifying speed, where once Angron's moments of lucidity had stretched across minutes of agonitum clarity. Now they fractured into heartbeats, islands of awareness in a churning ocean of crimson fury. The neural implants gnawed at the last vestiges of recovery with accelerated malice, their systemic poisoning outpacing even a Primarch's legendary resilience. This walking apocalypse in crimson plate burned with borrowed time, every thunderous heartbeat lending false vitality to a body that should have slumped dead decades past, the nails' unrelenting torment outstripping transhuman physiology's capacity to endure. Witnessing this degradation awoke ancient kinship in Lorger, a sacred responsibility kindling behind golden eyes that had fallen from light but never lost their preternatural empathy. Where Horus saw a weakening weapon to discard, where Guilliman would see criminal monster beyond redemption, the first prophet of chaos saw a brother drowning in fathomless agony. Salvation beckoned not through compassionate deliverance but through cosmic force. Thus the plan took shape in Lorger's mind, spinning delicate threads of forbidden knowledge and warpcraft into a macabre rescue attempt that would transmute biological curse into divine blessing, burning away Angron's tortured mortality at the altar of eternal damnation. When fleet navigators announced their approach to the Nucerian system, the name needled into Angron's neurolumscarred cortex like fresh white-hot iron. This was the Cradle World turned slave pit, stage of his degradation and proving ground where his chosen kin had watered arid dust with their blood, while nascent Imperial transports spiraled upward towards starry escape. Those wounds never healed, merely cauterized by centuries of fury split open anew, pouring psychic poison into already septic memory. Lorgar approached Angron's blood-fogged perception with serpentine grace, spinning veils of strategic necessity over predatory truth. Compliance here would strike Guilliman's eastern flank, prune another loyal world from the Emperor's rotting garden, speak to Horus of tactical devotion. Beneath these practicalities coiled older, enticements technological clues from the Dark Age surgeons who'd hammered torture into Godhead raise-fire vengeance against aristocratic oppressors who'd once cheered his Gorslick arena performances. Vengeance. The word struck deep, raising forgotten reflexes in savaged spirit where Guilliman's tactical plans or Horus's galactic ambitions found only shallow purchase. Here bloomed purpose from Nerosia's ashes, coaxing marrow from old bones. Nuceria, when they found it, wore imperial prosperity like ill-fitting searments. Once-proud city-states now strangled under imperial bureaucracy, their high rider overlords mouthing Terran oaths while practicing ancient cruelties. Yet the bones remained where Angron's loyal gladiators had fallen bleached white by hostile suns, scattered by scavengers, untouched by century-long winds or passing civilizations. Collarbones still encircled by corroded slaverings, skulls caved by Nucerian war mauls, shard-edged blades rusted fragments amid rib cages. Silence stretched as Angron gazed upon this calcified brotherhood, primordial grief cutting through pain circuits hardwired into twitching cerebrum. A moment's pure mourning blossomed amidst endless rage, Primarch grasping his head as surer agony than the nails erupted behind eyes squeezed shut against forgot humanity. Through tearless storm of emotion, Angron led his world eaters toward Desan nexus of ancient torment transformed into Imperial command hub. Where once he'd shuffled collared toward bloodsend under whip cracks, now he marched god of warhood, tectonic fury made manifest, retribution given steel-armored form. Desaz's defenses proud bastions mocking starless skies, void shields shimmering above Ferrocrete walls, dissolved like parchment before furnace breath. Gates shattered before chain axes screaming, shielding voids flickering out under fusillades of warp-blissed ordnance. Inside 3 hours the city's spine lay broken, ruling caste dragged before crimson judgment thrown by laughter-choking legionaries. Then came revelation more brutal than orbital bombardment, discovery more lethal than cyclonic torpedo spread. The High Rider's truth stood chiseled in stone archives, and sung in schoolyard rhymes not proud gladiator defiance unto glorious death but yellow cowardice, Angron fleeing pell-mell from Dashelica's slope while brothers died cursing his name. Noble sacrifice refashioned as morality play against rebellion, slave names forgotten, while coward Primarch became parable cautioning disobedience. Something deeper than fury froze Angron's twin hearts then. Wordless he stood amidst burning archive towers, crackling parchment scorching closed fists, eyes reflecting orange flames yet seeing cold nothing. Comprehension crystallized. The High Riders hadn't merely enslaved flesh or shed blood. They'd poisoned memory itself, desecrated the only sacred bond he'd ever known. When speech returned, it wasn't a roar but frozen dagger-cutting warp-chilled silence. Kill them all. 3 words spawned planetary genocide. Legionaries advanced with methodic despair, Bolter reports punctuating screams not born of fear but betrayed confusion. Farmers died clutching worthless plastic identity papers, children obliterated Midlalaby, aged scholars bursting bloody confetti across priceless codices. World became abattoir dimensions beyond tactical necessity, gruesome sacrifice slathering Khorne's celestial altar with continent-spanning blood flow. Far distant, unfolding catastrophes painted stratagem diagnostics crimson as Robot Guilliman read Advanced Scout reports with mountain horror. Could they mobilize in time, cut the head off monstrosity before poison spread? 83 vessels translated from Manville points, ultramarines deploying with haste that would later haunt their Primarch's tactical reviews. Too late, far too late. They emerged above world, already bisected Western Hemisphere glowing angry head wounds, where cyclonic torpedoes had sterilized hive clusters, eastern continents weeping atmospheric firestorms visible from orbit. Guilliman cursed into Vox static, as crash crews plummeted toward warzone that would sear Psyker's sight for generations. Amidst collapsing spires, Guilliman's personal teleport flare-vaporized armored chariot ranked riders when he materialized shouting challenges, blade spinning sunflare arcs. Angron emerged from smoke like manifest calamity, chainblade screaming counterpoint to Guilliman's disciplined strikes, tusked maw howling incoherencies where once Warcraft's strategy had reigned. Iron Hand met Godforged ceramite, sparking coronal flares over corpse-strewed plazas where Nucerian sigils cracked under trampling boots. Beneath duel's cacophony swelled other sound lorgers chanting, Baskrald litany in tongues predating Saul's accretion disk, syllables twisting space around preacher primarch as warp gates yawned crimson overhead. Demon light bloodied clouds, nullifying natural shadows, drenching combatants in glow that cast angled gorshadows 20 meters long. Change came sudden as tectonic shift. Guilliman saw first Angron's scream cutting off mid-roar, spine arching grotesquely backward, plate bucking beneath swelling musculature. The butcher's nails pulsed like parasitic constellations, burning black then menacing red mutations spreading virusquick across primarch biology. Angron's skin slewed away in ashfalls revealing scaled carapace beneath, great wings bursting scapulae in arterial gushers that baptized Guilliman in Brothers Vidi. Guilliman staggered back, tactical brilliance momentarily overwhelmed by sheer transgression against natural order. The Neverborn's laughing roar echoed through transforming throat. Psychic backlash struck next as surviving World Eaters librarians mobilized final desperate gambit. Silver cords stretched behind 7 strained faces, joining outstretched hands as psychic entity coalesced memory of Legion's nobler warhounds past given desperate shape. The communion strained against empyreal pressures, ghostly fingers clawing at Angron's flickering soul just as Lorgar's chants reached crescendo. For suspended moments redemption balanced on blades, edge legionary ghosts holding their father's spirit above damnation's vortex. Then Lorgar's pacted gods enforced their mortgage. With sound of reality tearing, Angron's demon soul slammed back into ascendant flesh. The communion shattered, librarians collapsing mid-scream, cranial implants detonating in sympathy like macabre fireworks. What rose from molecular carnage bore Angron's memories without his soul. First it turned stalkerized toward the librarians. Once treated as necessary evil despite Butcher's nail feedback pains, now they represented last vestiges of Psyker's warhounds had never fully embraced. Slaughter was impersonal, efficient sorceress heads crushed through armor ceramite, silvered souls flickering bright before cornate jaws swallowed them whole. Where once tactical feints and layered subterfuge marked Legion approach, roaring simplicity now reigned. Guilliman's retreat orders rang hollow across orbital voxnet. 70% casualties exchanging nightmare for Pyrrhic holding action, Ultramarines left outskirts where skies pulsed unnatural crimson. Below them, Lorgar watched his masterpiece unfold, strategic genius recognizing how Ruinstorm's creation would isolate Terra, trap Emperor defending heart without loyalist extremities. Yet deepest satisfaction bubbled elsewhere, redemption of Brother Damned, if redemption meant eternal service to Predator God. World burning concluded with clinical horror. Angron's ascended form stalked extermination squads, directing methodical eradication. Rivers flowed red before evaporation, seas steamed biological sludge, temperate biomes torched skeletal. 4 billion souls extinguished, entire genetic legacy erased. Uppercut High Rider vainly offering data slates charting families' 7-generation loyalty to Imperial truth met same fate as feral Underhive mutant scrabbling with shivknife. Trust Conqueror's slave decks emptied for their marrow this time, 30,000 thralls slaughtered across 40 hours, until Conquistador cries melded gruesome architecture. Khorne observed processional with grim efficiency, mass grave beneath flagship repurposed material towards skull throne imperious. World Eaters adopted cornate rites without conversion pain's genetic predisposition, sharpened by ascendant Primarch's example. Bloody 8-bound rituals replaced depleted apothecarian cadres, fallen initiates shoveled into mass graves, birthed raptors capering warped. Horus welcomed modified brother with potent mixed gratification trepidation. Angron's strategic value paled before raw carnage potential unleashed at Siege's penultimate hour. Yet War Master observed World Eater's convulsions with scholarly detachment. This was no longer human force rebelling against tyranny, but warp-spawned obliteration vector wearing Geneforged physiology like ill-fitting costume. Lorgar bore secret sins proudly. His Primarch gift had always been seeing deeper truths behind reality's veil, where brothers saw shattered monster, he perceived martyr needing violent salvation. Angron's eternity would glitter with stolen divinity, agony traded endless blood hunt across screaming realms. Entire Legion marched willingly into damnation, butchers seeking cosmic slaughterhouse scales. What warhounds were forgot, World Eater's title claimed grotesque actuality. Only Khorne laughed, omnivore deity fattening on galaxy-dorching hatred. Somewhere in desert places, Emperor wept unseen tears for the coming slaughter. The fighting pits aboard their vessels ran red with blood as battle brothers honed their skills against one another, often to the death. Those who survived emerged stronger, their bodies covered in fresh scars, their minds further eroded by the constant activation of the nails. Some within the Legion began to adopt new customs. Warriors carved the symbol of their new patron into their armor, sometimes into their very flesh. They took trophies not just from enemies, but from worthy opponents within their own ranks, creating totems of bone and ceramite that decorated their battle plate. the Legion's original blue and white heraldry became increasingly obscured beneath layers of dried blood, which some battle brothers began to consider their true colors. When the Traitor Armada finally reached Terror, the World Eaters found themselves at the forefront of Horus's assault. Their role was clear. They would be the hammer against the anvil of the Imperial Palace, the unstoppable force meant to shatter the immovable object of the Emperor's defenses. It was a task perfectly suited to their nature, requiring neither subtlety nor restraint, only the capacity for violence that had become their defining trait. The Siege of Terror began aggressively as the combined forces of the Traitor Legions hammered at the outer defenses of the Imperial Palace. The World Eaters, true to their nature, led many of the frontal assaults, caring nothing for the devastating casualties they suffered in the process. To die in battle was the ultimate release from the Nail's torment, a fact that made Angron's sons utterly fearless in the face of the Loyalists' desperate defense. Surviving picked captures from the siege show, the World Eaters breaching the walls of the palace, their armor slick with blood, both enemy and their own at their head, strode Angron in his new demonic form, wielding the massive black blade gifted to him by the Dark Mechanicum, where other traitor primarchs directed their forces from command centers, plotting complex strategies. Angron led from the front, a crimson whirlwind of destruction that crashed against the Imperial defenses again and again. The palace's Great Gate, a massive structure designed to withstand bombardment from orbit, eventually fell to the World Eaters' relentless assault. Though the Sons of Horus would later claim this achievement for themselves, World Eater records insist it was Angron's black blade that finally shattered the adamantium barriers, opening the way for the traitor forces to pour into the Palac's inner courtyards. Among those first through the breach was Khorne, the 8th captain, having fought his way to the forefront of the assault. The warrior who had once been the voice of reason within the Legion now fell to its transformation, his armor as red with gore as his primarch skin, his chain axe, the restored axe that Angron had discarded, drinking deeply of loyalist blood. The bond between father and son had evolved into something darker, a shared communion in violence that rose above genetics. As the siege progressed, the World Eaters found themselves pitted against the defenders of the Eternity War, including elements of the Imperial Fists and Blood Angels legions. The clash between these forces highlighted the contrast in what the Space Marines had become. Where the defenders fought with determination to protect their emperor, the World Eaters attacked with abandon, seeking only to kill and be killed in the crucible of combat. It was during this phase of the battle that Angron reportedly confronted Sanguinius, the angelic primarch of the Blood Angels. The two had always represented opposite aspects of controlled violence. Sanguinius struggling against his inner darkness, Angron consumed by his. Now they stood, one a beacon of the Emperor's light, the other a manifestation of chaos unleashed. The history indicates that Sanguinius declined Angron's challenge, recognizing that their true confrontation would come later under circumstances yet to unfold. The denial of this combat seemed to enrage Angron further, driving him to new heights of destruction as he led his sons deeper into the palace complex. The World Eaters carved a crimson path through the defenders, their advance marked not by strategic objectives claimed, but by the sheer tally of the slain. As the siege reached its height, with the traitor forces penetrating ever closer to the Emperor's sanctum, Imperialis, Horus made his fateful decision. Recognizing that time was running out as loyalist reinforcements approached the Sol system, the Wararm Master lowered the void shields of his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, inviting the Emperor to teleport aboard for a final confrontation. This strategic gamble changed the course of the siege, drawing the Emperor away from the palace and into a trap that nearly succeeded. With their master gone to face the Emperor, the Traitor Legions continued their assault on the palace. Though now with diminished coordination, the World Eaters, never reliant on complex battle plans to begin with, simply fought on. Unconcerned with the larger strategic situation, their only goal remained the same. To kill in the name of Khorne, to spill blood and take skulls until none remained standing against them. When word reached the battlefield of Horus's defeat at the Emperor's hands, the effect on the various traitor legions differed markedly. Some, like the Sons of Horus, fell into disarray immediately, their purpose shattered with their primarch's death. Others, like the Wordbearers, withdrew in careful order, preserving their strength for the long war to come. The World Eaters were among the last to retreat, abandoning the assault only when it became clear that no more killing could be achieved. Angron, unlike some of his brother primarchs, showed little reaction to Horus's fall. The being he had become existed for battle alone, with no concern for the political movements that had sparked the rebellion. As the traitor forces fled terror, the demon primarch looked back upon the Imperial Palace with something approaching regret. Not for the rebellion's failure, but for the countless skulls that would now go unclaimed, the blood that would remain unspilled. The retreat from terror was not an orderly withdrawal, but a desperate flight. The Traitor Legions, their grand ambitions shattered by Horus's death, scattered before the vengeful advance of the Loyalists. For the World Eaters, this chaotic exodus held a bitter irony. They who had never retreated from battle during the Great Crusade now fled across the stars, leaving behind the broken dream of overthrowing the Emperor. The journey to the Eye of Terror became a blood-soaked odyssey. The World Eaters fought their way across the width and breadth of the wounded Imperium, engaging Loyalist forces wherever they encountered them. These were not strategic engagements, but desperate last stands and savage raids. Each battle allowing the Legion to vent their frustration at defeat through the only outlet they still understood: violence. Many World Eaters never reached the Eye at all. Some fell in forgotten skirmishes on nameless worlds, their deaths unmoored and unrecorded. Others, driven to madness by the ceaseless pain of the Butcher's nails, turned on their own battle brothers, or launched suicidal attacks against impossible odds. The Legion bled itself thin during this long retreat. Its strength diminished not just by external enemies, but by the rage that had metastasized within its ranks. Angron himself moved in and out of reality during this period, his demonic nature making it difficult for him to maintain a constant presence in the material realm. When present, he led his sons in apocalyptic slaughters that left entire star systems devoid of life. When absent, drawn back into the immaterial realm of his patron, the Legion fought on without him, guided only by their implant-induced bloodlust and the growing influence of Khorne. Eventually, the remnants of the World Eaters reached the swirling madness of the Eye of Terror, that great warp rift where reality and unreality bleed into one another. Here, the laws of physics bent to accommodate the whims of the Chaos Gods, and time itself became an unreliable measure. For beings devoted to Khorne, it was both sanctuary and proving ground, a realm where eternal war was not just possible, but inevitable. Within the Eye, Khorne gifted his chosen legion with a demon world, a planet remade to reflect the blood god's nature. Mountains of skulls rose from plains of brass, rivers of blood flowed between them, and the very air tasted of iron and salt. Here the World Eaters established their new kingdom, a realm of constant battle, where the weak were cold, and only the strongest survived to claim skulls for the Skull Throne. Yet even in this perfect realm of endless combat, the Legion could not escape the consequences of its transformation. The very qualities that had made the World Eaters such effective servants of Khorne, their uncontrollable rage, their addiction to violence, their disregard for anything beyond the immediate slaughter. Now turned inward without external enemies to fight, they increasingly turned on each other, battle brother against battle brother in an endless cycle of bloodletting. This self-destructive spiral reached its peak on the demon world of Scarithrax in an event that would forever change the Legion. The World Eaters had come to this world alongside the Emperor's children. Their former brothers in arms now as debased by the influence of Slamish, as they were corrupted by K2 legions that had once fought side by side during the Great Crusade now served rival gods, embodying opposing aspects of chaos. Excess versus rage, pleasure versus pain. The conflict began as a territorial dispute, with both legions claiming the world's crystal cities as their prize. In the black ice canyons and obsidian spires, they clashed in a clatter of chain axes and sonic weapons. For a time, the battle seemed to favor the World Eaters. City after city fell to their berserker assaults, the Emperor's children retreating before their advance. But as Skalthrax's freezing night descended, a period of extreme cold that could freeze even space marine flesh solid, both legions were forced to seek shelter. By unspoken agreement, the fighting paused as warriors of both sides huddled in the ruins, waiting for dawn to resume their battle. It was in this moment of forced respite that Khorne, once the voice of reason within the Legion, made the decision that would earn him the title the Betrayer. The 8th Captain, perhaps the last living link to the warhounds the Legion had once been, had changed profoundly since Terror. The warrior who had bridged the gap between Angron and his sons now embodied the worst excesses of their transformation. The voice that had once counseled restraint now spoke only of blood and skulls. Khorne raged against the cessation of killing, seeing in this practical necessity a weakness unworthy of Khorne's servants. Seizing a flamer, he turned its Prometheum fire not against the enemy, but against his own battle brothers. The burning Prometheum ignited the ancient structures around them, starting a conflagration that soon engulfed entire sections of the icebound city. As the flames spread, driving warriors from both legions from their shelters, Khorne continued his rampage. His chains rose and fell in bloody arcs, claiming the lives of World Eaters and Emperor's children alike. It made no difference to him who fell beneath his blade. All that mattered was that the killing continued. The madness proved contagious. Other World Eaters, driven by the familiar pain of their implants and the unfamiliar sensation of betrayal, joined the frenzy. Battle brothers who had fought together for centuries now turned on each other, competing for shelter, for weapons, for the simple opportunity to continue killing. The Emperor's children, never once to miss an opportunity for sensation, joined the melee, turning what had been an organized conflict into a chaotic free-for-all. By the time dawn broke over Skalthrax, the World Eaters no longer existed as a coherent legion. Where once they had been bound by brotherhood and shared purpose, now they were shattered into countless warb bands, each following the strongest warrior among them. The chain of command, already weakened by the Butcher's nails and the influence of chaos, broke entirely under the weight of KHN's betrayal. These fragmented warb bands scattered across the Eye of Terror and beyond, each seeking its own path of blood and skulls. Some established dominion over minor demon worlds, ruling as lords of slaughter over realms remade in K's image. Others became nomadic raiders, traveling from system to system in search of fresh victims. A few attached themselves to larger chaos forces, offering their berserker fury as a weapon to any warlord willing to point them at an enemy. The largest concentration remained with Angron on his demon world. Though even these warriors organized themselves into competing warb bands rather than a unified legion. The demon primarch, when present in the material realm, would occasionally gather these desperate forces for major campaigns, briefly reuniting the legion under his bloody banner. But such moments became increasingly rare as the millennia passed. With Angron spending more time in the immaterial realm of his patron than among his Gene sons, Khorne himself became a legend even among the servants of chaos. A lone warrior wandering the Eye of Terror, and occasionally the wider galaxy, appearing wherever the fighting was thickest. Those World Eaters who encountered him viewed him with a complex mixture of reverence and fear. He embodied everything they aspired to be, the perfect killer, the ideal servant of K, yet his presence brought destruction to friend and foe alike. To fight alongside, KHN was to risk becoming just another skull for the Blood God, regardless of allegiance. As the Great Scouring pushed the Traitor Legions further into the Eye of Terror, the scattered warb bands of the World Eaters adapted to their new reality. Their armor, once the proud blue and white of the War Hounds, evolved to reflect their new allegiance. Most adopted the red of spilled blood and the brass of K's realm, though some maintained elements of their original heraldry as a reminder of what they had once been. Their combat doctrine, already focused on close-quarters bloodshed, became even more specialized. Many warbands discarded ranged weapons entirely, viewing them as unworthy tools that denied the joy of killing at arm's length. The chain axe, always favored among the Legion, became a sacred implement for harvesting skulls in K's name. Veterans crafted elaborate variations of this weapon, incorporating demonic elements or the teeth of worthy opponents into their design. The Butcher's nails, which had once been the Legion's curse, became their sacrament. New aspirants to the scattered warb bands, whether captured loyalist space marines forcibly turned or new recruits drawn from human populations, received the implants as their initiation. The crude technology combined with the corrupting influence of the warp-created warriors, even more savage than the original Legion members, berserkers who existed solely for the moment of killing. Rituals and traditions emerged among the various warbands, each developing its own customs while maintaining the core devotion to Khorne. Some emphasized the collection of skulls, building great monuments to the blood god from the remains of worthy foes. Others focused on blood itself, incorporating consumption or bathing rituals into their worship. A few maintained elements of the old gladiatorial traditions from Nuceria, forcing captives or aspirants to fight in arena settings that echoed Angron's origins. Despite their fragmentation, the World Eaters maintained a loose identity through their shared devotion to K and the legacy of Angron. When encountered by other forces of chaos or the servants of the Imperium, they were still recognized as a distinct entity. Their reputation for uncontrollable savagery, setting them apart even among the debased Traitor Legions. As the years stretched into centuries and then millennia, the World Eaters became increasingly divorced from their origins. New recruits knew nothing of terror or the Emperor's betrayal, caring only for the immediate satisfaction of violence and the favor of Khorne. The Legion's history became myth, then legend, preserved in fragments by those few veterans who maintained some connection to their past. For most, existence narrowed to a simple cycle. Kill, offer skulls to Khorne, receive strength to kill again. For millennia, the scattered warb bands of the World Eaters drifted through the swirling madness of the Eye of Terror, existing in a state of perpetual warfare. Time held little meaning in those demon-touched realms where reality bent to the whims of the Chaos Gods. Warriors who had once stood on the walls of the Emperor's palace lived and died and lived again. Their existence an endless cycle of violence that echoed their patron's desires. Yet even in this shattered state, the influence of Angron occasionally pulled the fragments together. In the middle of the 38th millennium, the galaxy witnessed one of the most devastating World Eaters' incursions since the heresy itself. Angron, emerging from the warp in all his demonic glory, gathered not just his own Gene sons, but a vast coalition of chaos forces. 50,000 Chaos Space Marines, accompanied by countless cultists, demon engines, and other servants of the Dark Gods, followed the Red Angel's banner in what Imperial historians would later name the Dominion of Fire. The campaign began suddenly with Angron's forces erupting from the warp in a sector previously untouched by major chaos activity. World after world fell before their onslaught, with the World Eaters at the vanguard of every assault. Unlike the calculated strategies of other Traitor Legions, Angron's approach remained brutally direct. Total planetary assault followed by systematic extermination of all resistance. No surrender was accepted, no mercy offered. Entire populations were put to the sword, their skulls piled in mountains as offerings to Khorne. For 200 years, the Dominion of Fire burned across Imperial space, eventually claiming more than 70 sectors. The Imperium, always slow to respond to threats in its vast domain, struggled to contain the spreading devastation. Star systems that had known peace for millennia found themselves suddenly engulfed in apocalyptic warfare. Their planetary defense forces overwhelmed by the fury of Chaos Space Marines, who had been honing their skills in the Eye of Terror for thousands of years. Eventually, the Imperium marshaled its forces for a counteroffensive. 4 Space Marine chapters, each representing the Emperor's vengeance in their own way, formed the spearhead of this response. They were joined by 2 Titan legions, their god machines bringing firepower that could match even the demon engines in Angron's horde. Behind them came over 30 regiments of the Imperial Guard, drawn from worlds across the sector. The conflict lasted decades, a grinding campaign of attrition that slowly pushed the forces of chaos back. World by world, the servants of the Emperor reclaimed what had been lost, though many planets were so thoroughly devastated that little remained worth saving. In the wake of Imperial advances, exterminatus was sometimes declared on worlds too corrupted by chaos to be redeemed, their surfaces scoured clean by virus bombs or cyclonic torpedoes. By the campaign's end, the Imperium had recovered 90% of the territory lost during the initial chaos onslaught. Angron himself had long since departed back to the warp, his material body unsustainable in real space without constant sacrifice and ritual. The remaining World Eaters' warbands fought on for a time before gradually dispersing, returning to their nomadic existence or seeking new worlds to conquer. The Dominion of Fire, while devastating, represented just one of many incursions led by the World Eaters over the millennia. Most were smaller in scale, isolated raids rather than coordinated campaigns. A warband would emerge from the warp, launch a series of brutal attacks on vulnerable worlds, then vanish back into the Immaterium before significant Imperial forces could respond. Such hit-and-run tactics allowed the servants of Khorne to harvest skulls and blood without risking destruction. However, the most infamous World Eaters' incursion since the heresy occurred in the closing years of the 41st millennium. The conflict that would become known as the First War for Armageddon began not with grand strategy, but with cosmic chance. The emergence of a space hulk called the Devourer of Stars from the warp near a demon world controlled by Angron and his World Eaters. The massive conglomeration of ancient vessels, fused together by the unpredictable currents of the Immaterium, provided an opportunity that Angron could not ignore. The space hulk's erratic warp signature suggested it was capable of making jumps through the Immaterium, potentially delivering a chaos force directly into the heart of Imperial territory. For a legion fractured into competing warbands, such a vessel offered rare unity of purpose, a chance to bring war to their ancient enemy once again. Under Angron's leadership, the World Eaters and their allied forces boarded the Devourer of Stars. Alongside the Chaos Space Marines came millions of cultists known as the Children of Sanguinary Unholiness, as well as 12 powerful demons of Khorne called the Crew Praetoria. This unholy assemblage settled into the twisted corridors and vast chambers of the Space Hawk, waiting as the immense vessel drifted through the currents of the warp. When the Devourer of Stars finally emerged into real space, it appeared in the Armageddon system, home to one of the Imperium's vital hive worlds. The planet Armageddon, with its billions of inhabitants and crucial industrial output, represented a perfect target for Khorne servants. A world whose fall would create a tide of blood pleasing to the blood god while striking a significant blow against Imperial power. The assault began with unexpected allies, cultists within Armageddon's population who had been corrupted by chaos. Influence spread during a series of warp storms that had isolated the planet. As civil unrest turned to open rebellion in multiple hive cities, the chaos forces made planetfall with Angron himself leading the charge. Nearly half of Armageddon's planetary defense forces defected to the invaders. Further strengthening the chaos position, the Loyalist defenders, overwhelmed by this dual threat, fell back to the southern subcontinent of Armageddon Secundus. They established defensive lines along the river Styx and Charon, preparing for what seemed an inevitable defeat. The World Eaters, having secured the northern subcontinent of Armageddon Prime, appeared poised for total victory. Yet at this crucial moment, the advance halted. The warp storm that had carried the Devourer of Stars to Armageddon began to dissipate, cutting off the vital supply of warp energy that allowed Angron and the other demons to maintain their presence in the material realm. Faced with potential banishment, Angron ordered his forces to halt their advance and instead build monuments to K in the equatorial jungles, separating the two continents. For weeks, the World Eaters labored to create colossal structures of skulls, anointing them with the blood of sacrifices. These monuments served as conduits for warp energy, allowing Angron and his followers to remain materialized, each skull added to the growing piles. Each drop of blood poured upon the unhallowed ground strengthened the tether between realms. This delay proved crucial for the defenders. While Angron raised his monuments, Imperial reinforcements arrived in the form of the Space Wolves chapter, led by their great wolf Logan Grimnar. The Sons of Russ, ancient enemies of the World Eaters since the Night of the Wolf during the Great Crusade, brought not just their own considerable strength, but also requested the aid of the mysterious Grey Knights. The Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malas, specifically trained to combat demonic threats. When Angron finally resumed his advance, he found the Imperial lines reinforced and ready. The battle raged across the banks of the river Styx, and Charon with the World Eaters demonstrating the same fury that had defined them for millennia. Angron himself led the western thrust across the Styx, smashing through the Imperial defenses and driving toward Hive Infernos and Hive Hell's Reach. It was here that the Grey Knights made their move. Teleporting directly into the heart of the Chaos advance, they confronted Angron himself. Led by Brother Captain Tamar Orlean, the psychically gifted Space Marines engaged the air itself, screamed as reality buckled under the weight of the demon primarch Angron's wrath. His black blade carving screams from the ether with each swing against the embattled Grey Knights. Hyperion of Squad Castian stood alone amidst the carnage, his silver armor cracked and bleeding ozone from failing psychic wards, yet his will burned brighter than the warp fires consuming Armageddon's plains. As Angron's apocalyptic strike descended to cleave the world in two, the Grey Knight channeled every shred of his soul into a final counterspell, fingers clawing at the bleeding edges of the Immaterium, teeth cracking under incantations that shook the fortress monastery foundations beneath their feet. The shriek of sundered demonic metal tore across the battlefield when Hyperion's focused agony shattered the black blade, the psychic backlash hurling World Eaters like chaff before the stormwind. In that splintered heartbeat of vulnerability, Captain Aurelian leapt through Warpflame with his nemesis blade blazing golden, driving the weapon through Angron's chest even as the demon Primarch's counterblow sheared Aurelian in half. Reality tore itself inside out with a thunderclap that deafened millions, banishing Angron back to the abyss, while Aurelian's dying breath crystallized into argent shards that still fall as snow in that blighted region 6 centuries later. Chaos lines ruptured like rotten sinew without their dark lodestar. Howling space wolves fell upon the hesitation, frost axes rising and falling in crimson tides as they drove the World Eaters from the corpse-choked trenches back towards the ash wastes. Cultists threw down their rusted weapons in terror, only to be trampled by fleeing traitor Astartes, making for their thunderhawks, the broken remnants of Angron's host abandoning their mortal dregs to Imperial vengeance. Pyres would burn for months across Armageddon's corpse cities. The hive spires of Gorgonid and Volcanus XIV transformed into macabre ossuaries, where commissars executed survivors too warp-touched for redemption. Though Imperial banners flew over ruins slick with toxic rain, the Inquisition's black ships soon swarmed the recovery efforts, enforcing amnesiac decrees that erased the victory from human memory like blood scrubbed from marble floors. For the shattered World Eaters' warbands, the defeat gnawed deeper than any chain X wound their Primarch shackled for a stolen century, their broken claws skittering across dead rock outposts like spiders fleeing light. They waged war without purpose, butchering worlds in frenzies that left no skulls for Khorne's throne, becoming parodies of the Legion that once unified galaxies beneath the Aquila. Then the rift tore night across the stars. Era Indomitus birthed nightmares too terrible for even the Ordo Malleus to catalog. Beyond the Cicatrix Maledictum's bleeding edge, where the Astronomican's light faded to whispers, Armageddon's once-buried wounds began to fester anew. Imperial reinforcements arriving after the Noctis Eterna found Hades' hive drowned under oceans of congealed warp blood, demon engines forged from hive city skeletons stalking plains, where trenches now pulsed with exposed veins of raw immaterium. Titans lay disemboweled middle, their carcasses becoming fortresses for clashing never-born legions, while mortal survivors cowered in ashen wastes where the rain ignited what little flesh remained unmutated. Salamanders forced beachheads through continent-sized demonculaba, whose birth screams flattened regiments, their flamers charring ritual glyphs meant to anchor Angron's return mere hours before completion. Yet this interruption brought only fleeting respite. 8 solar months later, the first crimson omen dripped across decadent Agratha's IV, when its planetary governor drank champagne from a goblet that refilled endlessly with hot blood. On Forge World Mordant 66, 6-6 Mechanicus toasters seized mid-cogitation to recite Angron's true name in binary screams. Soon after, 88 Chaos-corrupted war sermons played simultaneously across Vox networks galaxy-wide, timed precisely to the moment Angron materialized fully upon the blood moon of Cerberus IX. He walks now. Chooser of Skins Raveneaters whisper this truth in gutted gantries and Munitorum waste ducts. In the Terrordark beyond the Astronomican, coordinated attacks shatter sector capitals, where World Eaters' banners haven't been seen since the Siege of Terra. The Void Butchers descend on cordoned shipping lanes, crimson boarding pods drilling through hulls to butcher entire crews in vacuum before message buoys can launch. The Bloodstalkers methodically dismantle planetary defenses from ice-creep bunkers shaped with demon bone targeting optics, earning grudging respect even as they emblazon fresh skulls onto Angron's throne road. Deep inside warp-translated holds of Blackstone fortresses, blue and white armored veterans from Cadre 331 duel their own chain axes in eternal gladiator pits, proving the traditions of Nucerian blood courts endure 600 years past the heresy's flames. Most dangerously, Angron no longer fades between victories. Khorne's fire pumps thick through wounds ripped open by the Great Rift, transforming what were once costly summoning rituals into casual strides between stars. Where before his banishment strewn entire generations of warlords, now entropic shock waves register Angron manifesting 3 systems apart within solar months, each crimson omen cycle shorter than the last. Inquisitorial Conclave report Beta Gamma 0119K8 identifies 1,700 potential Angron summoning events, correlated to major warp rifts, as his influence bleeds through the scarred galaxy. 9 chapters lost scouting beyond the Lichtenjal line in 6 standard months. The Flesh Terrors report Nova Marines genocide irrecoverably tainted after fighting alongside Silver Templar forces that later manifested 88 aberrant genomarkers. When the Sanguinala displays on Baal Tertius, Moon wept streaming blood before shattering under harmonic frequencies matching Angron's battle cry during the Arcs of Omen campaign. Even the unnumbered suns began sterilization protocols on systems too wounded to quarantine. These carefully documented horrors form the emerging proof Khorne's legions fight not with blind fury, but cold strategy. They build towards something monumental, a galaxy-spanning blood circuit Angron's warbands methodically carve through imperial space, each atrocity wiring fresh conduits for Khorne's pantheon to bleed reality dry. On Zaith, salvage crews found Space Wolf dreadnoughts fused mid-battle with World Eater contemptors inside a cathedral where the stained glass reformed daily to depict Angron's victories, demon priests decoding their god Primarch's grand design from the aver-shifting shards. A design whose completion may mark the end not of worlds, but of sentient war itself, the moment Khorne's throne absorbs the last drop of strategic wrath, leaving only mindless slaughter amid a galaxy where the warp and materium bleed together under Angron's endless